Welcome back, Joint Appropriations Committee. We are back from our lunch break. The time is 1:11. We are still with the Department of Health and Director Johansson. Welcome back. Go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. We left off on the bottom of page 260 in the Behavioral Health Division, Unit 2506. This is outpatient mental health. Before I talk about that exception request, I want to queue up 3 additional requests that are kind of lumped together across 4 units, 2506, 2507, 2508, and 2509. These are our outpatient and residential mental health and substance abuse units. To put it simply, this is funding the department provides for community mental health and substance abuse centers. As part of the step 3 reduction proposals in 2021, there were significant reductions proposed to those 4 units, which directly translate to funding for community mental health and substance abuse centers. The legislature directed us to not make those reductions, restored the funding on a one-time basis, and directed us to bring them back in this budget. So you'll see a total across those 4 units in that budget cut from step 3, approximately $15 million. We'll go through each one, but just to queue up the discussion, again, outpatient and residential mental health and substance abuse funding that would have been cut in step 3, and if action is not taken, would be cut in July 1st of next year. So the first one is on the bottom of page 260. Again, this is an outpatient mental health, total of $7.2 million in state general funds. And again, we've requested this as part of our ongoing standard budget, and the governor has made his recommendation to approve that.
Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we get too far off of page 260, a question on that chat to text exception request. The way you listed it, it says it's for fiscal year 2026 only. So is that one time or is it ongoing? Does it need to biennialize? Just trying to fully understand the ask so that we make sure we get it in there properly. No issue with the topic, just wanting to make sure we get the funding properly allocated.
Madam Chairman, Representative Walters, so those 2 items, and I'll have my senior administrator, Matt Petrie, speak to it in more detail if needed. We have 2 line items in that exception request. One is for the operations of the Lifeline. The $958,000 that you see there would be a fiscal year number because we have ARPA funding up until fiscal year 26. So that is a fiscal year number that would be ongoing and would be biennialized. The second figure, $774,000, would be the addition of text and chat functionality in the Lifeline. Mr. Petrie can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that's preparatory for that function being able to be implemented. I think we're waiting on federal policy to allow that. There's a lot of moving parts with 988 and how things are geo-fenced by area code, et cetera, but we're essentially asking for that to add the functionality when it becomes available. But Representative Walters, if I may, rely on Mr. Petrie to elaborate or correct anything I misstated.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, that is correct.
Introduce yourself to the committee just real fast.
Matt Petrie, I'm the Senior Administrator of the Behavioral Health Division. That is correct. We have operational funding for 1 year of the next biennium as operations stand today, just call capacity. If we add or when we add both text and chat capacity, we would need an appropriation for the full biennium for that amount. All states are rolling out text and chat capability, including the state of Wyoming. The call centers themselves are poised to basically add that to their capacity and to their resources, but it will require some additional funding in terms of staffing and some infrastructure costs as well.
So just to follow up on that, so then the biennial number will become 1.9 million for the operational side.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, I believe that's accurate. The 958,000 operational is 1 fiscal year, double that for a biennium, which we wouldn't need until the 27-28 biennium, since we would have fiscal year 26.
Thank you.
Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just so I'm clear, on the the number for text and chat, is that to add the function of this? And is there an ongoing maintenance cost after bringing the service online? Thank you.
Madam Chair, Representative Sherwood, my understanding, which Matt can add to or correct, is that that would be the biennial cost to add the functionality to both call centers, including the technical function, as well as when you add that technical function, you have potentially more entry or more demand or volume going into the lifeline. And so there's a staffing component as well as those infrastructure components. But Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, that 774,000 is a biennial figure.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Representative Sherwood, that is a biennial figure for the addition of text and chat. One thing that we're seeing nationwide is that especially for individuals that are younger, text and chat is a much more preferable form of communication for them than just telephone calls. And so I think adding that functionality is important, but that would be the biennial cost moving forward. Most of that cost would be split 50-50 between our two call centers in Casper and Grable.
Follow-up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you alluded to then personnel. Do our call centers currently have enough folks to be able to respond to these text or chat queries?
Madam Chair, Representative Sherwood, they do not have the capacity now in terms of staffing to fully add text and chat. And that's primarily what this request is for, is to add that additional staffing for that increased volume.
All right, go ahead.
Moving on, Madam Chairman. So we talked about Unit 2506, the bottom $7.2 million request, again, relating to community mental health and substance abuse services that were proposed in the step 3 reductions that were funded on a one-time basis. The next unit is outpatient substance abuse, Unit 2507. Turn your attention to page 264. Priority number 3. Again, we're in community mental health and substance abuse funding. This is a $1.3 million request for outpatient substance abuse services. Again, sorry to sound like a broken record. This was a proposed step 3 reduction that was added back by the legislature, but funded one time.
Madam Chair.
Go, Chairman.
Thank you. Kevin, the 7.5 million on immediate tackle funds to ensure, could you explain that, please?
Can you ask the question again? I don't know that I'm tracking.
On the governor's rec, it says, I recommend 7.5 million effective immediately tobacco funds.
Thank
I'm
you.
not sure where that's coming from, where it's going.
Mr. Chairman, yes, we request that you do that.
Could you put
How
the
that-
mic closer?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we request that you do that. And the reason is tobacco funds are very close to the need that we have in the standard budget. But there's money that we anticipate that the revenue estimate for tobacco funds is lower than it could be. We estimate that this biennium, we're not going to spend all those funds, but we'd like to have you make it effective and immediate so we can access these funds that are in the remainder of this biennium to cover the shortfall. Well, it's not really a shortfall, cover the need for tobacco funds in 25, 26. In this process, we started a few years back. Just to wrap that up real quick, there used to be a process, and it really wasn't a very good process, but LSO and the State Budget Department have now worked together to have that process really clean and effective and neat. And they have the documents, and so do we, but we would ask that you make this effective immediate so we have enough funding in 25, 26.
So, but the fundamental problem is what? That there aren't enough funds out of the income of the tobacco fund?
Mr. Chairman, you all come out of the woods. And I believe that they're not adequately doing the revenue estimates. It's not LSO that does the revenue estimates, not the State Budget Department, but I believe that the revenue estimates are just too short. We always have extra money at the tail end of a biennium. So what we're doing is we're just using what we know of that, and we're using the revenue estimates that we're receiving.
So how did you come up with 7.5 million?
That's the need of the carryover. the anticipated carryover.
So can we see your calculations? We need to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. It's LSO and the state budget department is a shared document between the two of us. We mutually agree upon the statistics. LSO has it.
And so how much of the 7.5 million will be used in this biennium?
Mr. Chairman, so if I understand the question correct, are you asking how much of the 7.5 million that we're asking to make effective immediate is used in the current biennium?
Yeah, any of it?
No, that's what we anticipate for the carryover amount to be. That would be the unused portions.
So that's what I don't understand, because the tobacco funds have a balance. And so where is the balance coming from? That's what I don't.
The balance comes from the trust fund and then the operational cost, the income fund on that.
Don, go ahead.
Madam Chairman, Representative Nicholas, statute governs the operations of the Tobacco Trust Fund, and anything in the income account left at the end of the biennium gets automatically swept back to the corpus, which is statutorily inviolate. By making this effective immediate, you stop the sweep back to the corpus. If this wasn't effective immediate, there would be insufficient tobacco funds to operate these activities in the next biennium, according to, as Director Hibbard said, very conservative revenue estimates. So this is a mechanism to avoid the use of general fund in the amount of 7.5 million.
That makes sense. Any additional questions on this topic? Mr. Richards always straightens us out. Thank you. All right, go ahead.
Madam Chairman, again, page 264, $1.3 million in priority number 3. This is for outpatient substance abuse, step 3 reduction that was restored with one-time funding. A brief digression at the bottom of page 264 from the mental health and substance abuse request that we've been discussing. We do have priority number 38, which is an increase in federal spending authority. This is a no-cost exception request for state opioid response, or what we call the SOAR grant. Madam Chairman, members of the committee, this is just a B11 cleanup. We typically get these funds through the B11 process. And as you know, the past couple of years, we've been partnering with state budget department to clean up that B11 process and make it part of standard spending authority.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a question for clarity here, not on the program. Bottom of page 264, top of page 265, in the table, it indicates it's federal funds, yet the governor's recommendation recommends it's general funds. Should that be general funds or federal funds?
Madam Chairman, Representative Walters, it should be federal funds.
Representative Walters, where were you on that?
The governor's recommendation on the top of page 265 shows it as general fund and should be federal fund according to the agency now.
All right, continue.
Madam Chairman, page 267, now we're in residential mental health. Again, these are community mental health and substance abuse centers who provide these services. We have an exception request on the bottom of page 267, priority number 4, $2.6 million to fully restore the step 3 reduction that was proposed and never implemented for residential mental health services. And finally, on mental health and substance abuse, we'll move to unit 2509, page 271, residential substance abuse. Again, same song, 4th verse, $3.9 million to fully restore in the standard budget a step 3 reduction proposal for residential substance abuse services that was added back to our budget for this biennium with one-time funding.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, page 274, unit 2510 preschool services. There are 2 exception requests in this unit. The first one is on the top of page 275.
Madam Chairman, top of page 275, this is an exception request for the child count in the developmental preschools. This is always a placeholder that we put in the budget in anticipation of the December 1st child count that happens for the amount of children we see in that system. This exception request you could strike out. It is not needed. The child count went down.
Representative?
So Dawn, on that, we just need to make a motion on markup. We can't just ignore it because it's in the budget. And so we'll just make something in markup to avoid it. Thank you.
Can you restate that, Representative? I just can't hear sometimes when you're facing the other way.
I apologize and I'll do better. So because the child count enrollment is down and we don't need this exception request, my question to Mr. Richards was, what is the appropriate way to take care of it because it's in the governor's budget, and we'll just delete that out when we do markup.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, the next exception request in this unit is on page 276. This is the developmental preschool external cost adjustment. Bear with me with a little bit of background that I think is necessary. We are required by law every year to bring any external cost adjustment that has been calculated for the developmental preschools to the committee and to the legislature for consideration. Not only the current year's external cost adjustment, but all historically and previously unfunded external cost adjustments that have accumulated over time. There's two reasons why this external cost adjustment amount is larger than you've seen before. Number one, the most recent year's ECA was one of the highest I've seen, at least in my time here. So out of that $16 million request, about $9 million of the request is the current year's ECA.
Representative?
Director, though, but help us understand the origin of the ECA, because if this is based on the K-12 ECAs, then we'd understand that this high increase was probably due to inflation, some other things. So just clarify how we get that origin.
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, happy to. So it is similar to the K through 12 ECA that is essentially calculated and passed on to us, but the indices that are used are slightly different, wherein the developmental preschool ECA relies on one index of inflation, primarily cost of supplies. The K through 12 ECA has, I believe, four indices that include other inflationary components for cost of living adjustments, et cetera. So our ECA that's passed along to us for the preschools is slightly different and more simplified, but it is something that is calculated every year, and we bring not only that year's ECA, but the balance. So I mentioned one of the reasons that the request is so high is because the current year's external cost adjustment is significant. I think it was upwards of 19 or 20%. So it resulted in a current year ECA of just over $9 million. That's a primary driver of the ECA request being relatively high here. In addition, it's worth mentioning that last year, the governor recommended the current year's ECA, which was, I believe, 1.9 million. The legislature took action and increased that external cost adjustment to 4 million, which has been implemented. The way the ECAs in the preschools are implemented is that it directly impacts what we pay on a per child basis. So when the legislature funds an external cost adjustment in this unit, we translate that to the per child amount that gets paid to the preschools based on their child count, which happens December 1st every year. So that's you'll see the governor's recommendation here, which is my next point, was $12.2 million of that. And some questions have come in which are absolutely relevant and valid. Why 12.2 million? And bear with me while I explain the background on that. There is a draft bill that we were presented a couple of months ago that changes the way that the ECA in the developmental preschools is calculated and aligns it to the K through 12 external cost adjustment methodology. As I mentioned before, that adds three additional indices of inflation and cost to how the ECA for the preschools would be calculated. In addition, that draft bill increased in statute the per child amount based on that updating of the ECA methodology. In discussing our budget with the governor, that bill was in draft form. It had not yet been discussed by the Joint Education Committee. There is support in the governor's office for looking at that methodology change to equalize the developmental preschools with K through 12. And I think there's a preference to see what happens with that bill in the upcoming session, if it gets introduced, worked, and potentially passed. So this amount would align with what was originally recommended as the appropriation in that bill. However, nothing's ever easy. So the Joint Education Committee worked that bill. We testified on it and provided some support to the committee. They significantly increased the appropriation in that bill for a variety of reasons. And again, we prepared this exception request, as I think we have to, as if that bill does not exist. There's no indication that it will be introduced, ultimately passed. It might, and we're not unsupportive of that bill. Somewhat agnostic, I would say. There's pros and cons to all methodologies when you're calculating ECAs. But essentially, if the committee wanted to take action on this external cost adjustment at whatever amount, I would think it would be prudent to have some sort of contingency language on that bill draft, which I remember the LSO number. I think it was 0201. I'm not sure if it has a House bill or a Senate file yet, or if it's been received or been filed. I don't think we've seen a fiscal note on it. I might be mistaken, but that will certainly happen soon. So again, if the committee ultimately wanted to take action on this and mark up and make a recommendation for this ECA, I think some sort of contingency language with what happens with that bill would be advisable, given that if the bill passed and this ECA were approved as is, you'd have to have some deduplication, deconflicting that goes on between the current budget bill and what would happen in statute with the joint education draft, if that makes sense.
Representative?
Director Johansson, so we have in statute a per child amount, 9.
I think it's 80, Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, I believe it's 8,500.
8,500,
Give or
Madam
take.
Chairman, just to use that. And so then, as we've added ECAs, that's impacted that per child amount. So even though it's not in statute, it would be accepted, I believe, that our current per child amount is 11,219. Is that the amount we get?
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, if it were approved, yes.
If what was approved?
Excuse me, Madam Chairman, if you go to page 276, there's a table that breaks down for the past
Right.
several years,
Right.
what was approved and what was not, and our corresponding per child.
Okay, I was reading it wrong. So if it says the December 1st child count for fiscal year 23 was 3,548, per child amount of 11,219 for the previous ECA request, right?
Right.
And so that doesn't take into account the shortfall of the 16 million.
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, that is correct.
So if we were to add the 16 million in there, do we have a per child amount?
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, we can calculate that for you. I'm not sure if it's clear in the narrative of what that is.
Well, so I find I'm struggling to figure out how to quite do that, because if we add the 16 million in, what do we use for child count?
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, my lifeline to the left let me know if right now, if the ECA were passed as is, it would bring the per child amount to $11,219.45 per child. That's on the top of page 276.
Okay, so that's the 11,219. That's all in. That has us up to date, current, and everybody's happy.
No.
So I need to clarify that. That's all in, including the 16 million. Right?
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, yes.
Okay. So then if we go back then to the bill that's being considered, what is the per child amount there? It's 10?
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, in the original bill, I believe it was 10,500 or thereabouts.
Again?
10,500 per child or thereabouts. I'd have to.
Representing the 12 million.
Correct.
Dollar.
The Joint Education Committee made changes to the bill with amendments that, again, we haven't seen in the formal bill draft that gets filed. It took the per child amount up even higher and appropriated a larger amount in the appropriations section of the bill.
So I think it's been suggested, and maybe you can help me, Madam Chairman, thank you for your patience here, but there is also either funding or a request for funding to redo the funding model for developmental preschools. That is outside what the Joint Education Bill does.
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, yes.
So where kind of the option we have is fund it traditionally as we have through the budget based on current things, wait and see what the refunding model looks like, maybe reconsider it. We could adopt the Joint Education Bill and then maybe re-adopt again afterwards. It seems like a simpler solution till we get that might be to consider this traditional way of doing it. But if we do this, even though, Madam Chairman, even though we funded it at the 12, would there be an argument then that we are still short on the ECA of about $4 million?
Always, Representative Larson, always.
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, is there ever enough in my budget? The simple answer to your question is yes, I agree. There's the potential conflict that I was mentioning, that if you all took action on this ECA in the traditional form and the bill that could work through the session passed, which does two things: increases the per child amount and changes the ECA methodology. I think what the legislature would need to wrestle with between those two options, let's assume that the bill passed, the ECA methodology is updated, and an appropriation is in there of whatever amount, 12.2 million. I think they took the appropriation up to 20 plus million. Whatever that would be, there, in my view, there would need to be some sort of legislative understanding of what that does to historic ECA amounts in the traditional sense that we have always prepared. Meaning, let's assume that the bill passes and 12.2 million is appropriated, which was the original bill draft. Does that satisfy historic ECA requirements because the methodology has been updated and that's the dollar figure that's tied to it? It very well could. But I think there would need to be some sort of legal direction to the Department of Health so we know in the subsequent sessions what should we bring use to avoid either legislative or legal interpretations that would.
And so, Madam Chairman and Director, my point on the deficit of 4 million isn't in support or against. It's just saying that's what the document says, that we'd be shy. I just want to make sure that the committee kind of understands the options that are out there as we discuss between now and markup on how we want to approach this. And I just want to make sure that I had my head around it somewhat.
Representative Stith, bring us home.
Madam Chairman, Director Johansson, I just have an arithmetic question. So on page 276, we have a sentence that says the per child amount of $11,219.45 multiplied by 3,548 children equals $47,559,733. The problem is that's just not a true statement, right? Okay. It's actually about 39 million. So not that it matters greatly, but it sounds to me like if we approve this request, as the governor's indicated at 12 million, the per child amount's about 12,000. If we go for the first 16 million, then the per child amount's a little over 13,000 per child. That's what it looks like to me. Would you agree with that?
Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Stiff, without my calculator handy, I won't agree or disagree, but let me take a look at that. If there's a rounding error of multiple millions, we will correct that. That's on us, but let us take a look at that.
Madam Co-Chair. And could you, what are we paying now? Because the 11,219 is with the 12 million added. What are we currently paying per child?
Madam Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, right now I'll look to Matt Petrie or Reagan Latham behind me. I believe we're in the 9,000s.
I think it's in here.
Mr. Co-Chair, we'll get you that information.
And then give us the fully funded $16,000 number, whatever that 13,000 per child is. I think that's the Gov's rec. Or is that's 60? Okay. And then,
Madam Chair, if I may, Mr. Co-Chair, let us prepare a one-page brief on this for our follow-up with you. I want to make sure we're all on the same page here.
and then why don't you describe a maintenance of effort requirement? What happens once we do something?
Madam Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, thank you for that question. Yes, in Part B, we call it the Part B 619 program. This is governed by IDEA of federal regs, federal law. This is for the 3 to 5-year-olds. There's a maintenance of effort provision in that program, just like there is with K through 12 special ed, where money that is appropriated and put into these programs now sets a new floor of maintenance of effort. The MOE provision for Part B, we can provide that to you. As a reminder to the committee, this program with the developmental preschools has the Part C program, which is birth to 2 years old, and the Part B program, which is 3 to 5 years old. The MOE provision is on the 3 to 5-year-old Part B program. But yes, Co-Chairman Nicholas, you're right. It does establish a new floor of maintenance of effort.
And so, follow up.
Mr. Petrie, do you have anything to add there?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to tell you that the per child amounts currently for Part B, $8,674.
Could you repeat that?
$8,674. And for Part C, $6,908. The reason why those differ is because of what Director Johansson just described as the maintenance of effort requirements. There's much more pressure, if you will, to maintain those funding levels, those state paid funding levels for Part B than there is for Part C. So when we went through the budget cuts of 2 or 3 years ago, the bulk of that budget cut was sustained on the Part C side of the program that serves children birth through age 2.
And that was my follow-up question is how often have we only funded or disproportionately funded either A, B, or C? I think that's one time. Have we done it other than that?
Director?
Madam Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, the funding between Part C and Part B is naturally and necessarily different in the per child amount, as Matt mentioned, largely because of those maintenance of effort provisions. So I think it's historically been disparate, differentiated in the per child amounts there.
Thank you.
All right, so what I heard from the Department of Health is that they will be providing an updated one-pager on pages 276 and 277. We do understand, but it might be important to put it on the one-pager, the fact that we will need to deconflict a potential pending draft bill, which is actually not sponsored by a committee and probably cannot be, but Mr. Richards can help us.
Madam Chairman, just to add a little bit to this, the Joint Education Committee did approve that bill. It is posted, the fiscal note is complete. It's Senate File 19, so it'll start on the Senate side. It brings the per child amount up to $12,300, even $12,300, no individual dollars. The price tag associated with that bill is $26.2 million, which is about 13.9 million higher than the governor's rec, just to give some comparison. And to the chairman's remarks, we will need some contingency language in the event those conflict.
Senate File 19. It's 19 million more than the governor's recommendation currently in our budget book. Is that correct?
Madam Chairman, 13.9 million higher.
13.9 million. I'm sure the Senate will forward to that bill. All right. Thank you, Mr. Richards. I appreciate that update. We'll take note of that in your one-page summary and look forward to receiving that. Let's continue.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, we're on page 280. It's Unit 2512, and it's the Wyoming Life Resource Center. There is one exception request in this unit that begins in the middle of page 282.
Madam Chairman, this is another permanent land fund request for the Life Resource Center. You'll see the breakdown of maintenance equipment, housekeeping equipment, an all-wheel drive passenger vehicle, which is something we need sometimes in Lander. Again, no general fund request here, accessing the permanent land fund.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, that finishes the behavioral health unit. We'll be moving into the aging division on page 288. Unit 5001, administration for aging. There is no exception request in that unit. On page 293, unit 5002, senior care, there is one exception request that starts on the lower half of 294.
Madam Chairman, bottom of page 294, this is the Wyoming Home Services Program. This was also a budget reduction proposal for a full program elimination back in 2021. The legislature funded this one time with some strings attached for the department to complete a little bit of work on the program and bring it back last year. The strings that were attached were, there was some concern about income and income eligibility. So the legislature directed us to implement a means testing program to essentially assess income of participants in the home services program. We did that. We provided that to the legislature last year. In addition, the legislature directed us to explore with the federal government, with CMS, what we call a Section 1115 waiver to see if that could be a viable substitute for the Wyoming Home Services Program and generate additional federal dollars into that program. In the first round of exploration with CMS, we determined with them, but really on our own determination of what was possible, that broad scale waiver was not viable in the Wyoming Home Services system. So we reported to you all last year the results of that, and the direction in the current budget bill was another footnote for us to explore a more narrowly tailored Section 1115 waiver for home services of this kind. We have done that as well, and actually in the past several months submitted a Section 1115 waiver to CMS, which is currently under consideration. I cannot tell you the timeline of which they will review and adjudicate that, only that they have acknowledged receipt of it. We have seen lengthy Section 1115 waiver review periods, years. In some cases, we will continue to push for that review. And ultimately, if they were to act favorably on that waiver, we would come back to you all with a decision on the funding side for that waiver. Would you like to use the Wyoming Home Services budget or additional appropriation to make that waiver possible? That's an unknown right now. But what we're left with here is my request to keep the funding for the program of Wyoming Home Services that provides home care, home-based services to a non-Medicaid but elderly population mostly through our senior centers across Wyoming. My request is to keep that program operational for the next biennium while we await CMS review and feedback on the Section 1115 waiver. I will mention that through the process of numerous discussions with CMS on what could be possible if we added Medicaid components to Wyoming Home Services, our providers, our senior centers have been wonderful to work with and review and provide comment on our analysis, on our drafts, on our ideas for CMS. And I think it goes without saying for what is a relatively small program in the Department of Health for a relatively small number of individuals across Wyoming, between 1,000 and 1,500 people. These are good services that are provided. We've been asked numerous times, do these services keep people out of nursing homes? It's a really tough question to answer. And I think we've come to the determination through a lot of analysis that there is benefit and deterring of long-term care placements through Wyoming Home Services. But you have to look at these numbers and it's a pretty clear conclusion that it is a small program. So across the board, can we say that every dollar spent here is delaying a certain number of days of nursing home care? Probably not. But the services that are provided, care coordination, light housekeeping, some yard work, and then personal care, which all but 3 counties provide personal care. Think of activities of daily living, toileting, bathing, cleaning, et cetera. Those are things that we know as our population ages are absolutely important. There will be policy considerations down the road of what to do long-term with the home services program in light of what might be possible in the federal territory with certain types of waiver provisions, but we're not there yet. We just do not have a decision from CMS on whether or not that is possible. Ultimately, if we get that decision, we can come back to this committee in the legislature and report on what would be most prudent in our view in terms of funding the state match on that waiver, whether leveraging this home services budget or an additional appropriation. With that, Madam Chairman, happy to stand for any questions.
Questions? Senator Salazar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So 3 quick questions. Is the Wyoming Home Services the same as the Wyoming Community Services? And then secondly, the National Family Caregiver Support Program. That's obviously separate from the ones we just talked about. And then thirdly, do you have a breakdown by county as to how many people are being given these services? Obviously, I'd be interested in what you have on mind. So thank you.
Madam Chairman, Senator Salazar, I'll take them in reverse order. Third question, yes, we can provide that breakdown of services and enrollment by county. We'll get that to you. Secondly, the National Family Caregiver Support Program is separate from this, but does run through the same division and is managed by the same programming staff in my agency. And then third, or last but not least, Wyoming Home Services is very different from our Community Choices waiver, what we used to call our long-term care waiver in Medicaid. Let me just spend 30 seconds on that. They're similar in their mission, which is provide in-home services in the hopes of delaying or preventing nursing home placement. The long-term care waiver or Community Choices waiver in Medicaid has a similar mission, but is much larger because it provides much more comprehensive home-based care and state medical benefits to those waiver participants. And it has more eligibility restrictions in 2 ways. One, your traditional Medicaid income and asset limitations, as well as you have to qualify for the Medicaid waiver for nursing home level of care, meaning a public health nurse assesses your clinical and activities of daily living and determines you qualify for nursing home placement. In lieu of that placement, we offer home-based care through Medicaid, which is cheaper and generally the preference of folks. What we're exploring with the waiver that I mentioned, I'm saying waiver in a lot of different contexts. The waiver you all directed us to explore that would be new with CMS would kind of blend the two. You take Wyoming Home Services, kind of non-Medicaid population, and then the long-term care waiver population that's currently operating in Medicaid. And we've asked CMS, can we implement a program that identifies people pre-institutional, do not qualify for nursing home? They're slightly lower on that acuity and also slightly higher on income eligibility. Still small, but basically trying to capture folks who might ultimately end up in nursing home placement, but we provide a lighter menu of services, maybe a bit heavier than Wyoming Home Services, but lighter than the current Medicaid waiver, and get federal match on that. That's what's being explored with CMS, and we don't have an answer to that yet.
And then just one follow-up. What is the exact title? It's not the Wyoming Community Services. It's what?
It is in Medicaid, it is the Community Choices waiver.
Thank you.
All right, any final questions? All right, seeing none, go ahead.
Madam Chair, one final. Okay, that completes the budget book. One final item I wanted to mention from my introductory comments If you'd please reference the two-pager that we provided on Medicaid postpartum eligibility extension. Again, that was, it's in your materials. You all passed a bill that extended our postpartum coverage in Medicaid for pregnant women from 60 days to 12 months. The bill appropriated the current fiscal year dollar amount that was needed, which was 1.9 million of general fund and 1.9 million of federal funds. The bill also directed us to include that in our 2025-26 budget request. With all of the movement of the one-time funding, my own stress level, among other things, I missed that. We did not have that in our budget request, and that's on me. But we wanted to provide you a brief of what that would take, either through budget markup, budget amendment, governor's letter, et cetera, of what it would cost to keep that, what the coverage extension costs on a biennium basis. That is $3.8 million of state general funds for a biennium and 3.8 million of federal funds. You can see that in the summary section on the first paragraph. The second page provides a few eye charts of how we arrived at those estimates based on the enrollment patterns we anticipate. We will have much better data once the Medicaid eligibility unwinding is completed here in a couple of months, but wanted to bring this to the committee's attention. Regardless of the action that's taken, the bill is still law, so the coverage will continue. Either way, we will have to revisit the issue in the supplemental session, most likely, of what the enrollment and the spending is currently looking like. But with that unintentional oversight on my part, wanted to bring the postpartum eligibility extension cost to your attention. Happy to answer any questions.
Representative Larson.
Madam Chairman, thank you. I'm confused. I understand what you say in your summary, 3.8 in state general funds, 3.8 in federal funds. Then you come down to the methodology. We derive the annual cost estimate of 3.8 million, 50% state general fund, 50% federal funds. And then in that it says total annual cost 3.8 million. So clarify, please.
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, happy to. So the annual cost of 3.8 million would be all funding sources. Whereas on a biennial basis, it's basically the same number, but just for the general fund.
Very good. Thank you.
What can you tell me about Little's Law?
Madam Chairman, I can't tell you much, but Mr. Fuchs behind me would love to spend an hour on Little's Law if you'd like.
Appreciate the footnote.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you. Looking at your report, it says the projected increase in enrollment is 1,250. That includes the current or the what we've had?
Madam Chairman, Representative Henderson, that 1,250 would be the additional, what we anticipate an additional monthly enrollment for the postpartum eligibility group. So the additional arrival, so to speak, of because the coverage extension goes from 60 days to 12 months on a monthly basis, we anticipate that to be the growth in enrollment in that program.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Couple of questions. I'll start with one for Kevin. In the budget recommendations saying approved, if based on the fiscal profile, my estimate's about $15–16 million is roughly what I came up with in those various requests. Does that amount come off of the $50 million that's described as left on the table, or is that before already been accounted for because you would say it is truly approved?
Director Hibbard.
Madam Chair, it's included in the profile. So it's recommended and it does not impact the 50. There's still the 50.
Another question, different subject.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Based on your employees mainly that are here at your headquarters in Cheyenne, what is your remote or telework policy?
Madam Chair, Representative Walters, early on, a couple of years ago, we implemented for our staff who can, so this wouldn't include our facilities and 24/7 operations, but for folks who can, we offer 2 days a week of telework if their job allows for it, and 3 days a week in the office. Now, we will make exceptions for that in certain circumstances that are more of an exception to the rule than anything. But from my perspective, after the, at that point, 2 years of the pandemic, we value and I value in-person work, especially on the supervision side. There's something that's hard to quantify with in-person supervision, mentorship, management, et cetera. So we wanted to indicate that a majority of the day should be spent in the office as much as possible. And so our policy is somewhat hybrid for the folks in our offices here in Cheyenne who can have those sort of telework arrangements, that we are flexible with that.
Director, I see that you're replacing 308 computers. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, thank you in advance for your approval of that request.
Not gonna let that one go.
I'm not going to let it go.
And Madam Chair,
All right.
one final question, again, a different subject,
All right, great.
if I may. Madam Chairman, thank you. On page 119, we're discussing the school district, school-based waiver for Medicaid eligible students. And just kind of more of in detail, what is the plan going forward based on the standard budget request and exception request in this?
Madam Chairman, Representative Walters, could you give me that page? reference?
119.
Madam Chair, thanks for your patience, Representative Walters. So a couple of years ago, the legislature authorized the department to implement school-based service coverage in Medicaid. That has rolled out, I would say, slowly based on district interest. I think we have, folks behind me can correct me, I think we have at least 2 districts that are actively billing, with 3 others that are enrolled, for a total of 5. Again, my staff can correct me if I'm wrong on that. School-based services essentially cover for Medicaid eligible children things like mental health services that are provided in the school, PT, OT, that kind of thing, that can offset the cost elsewhere in the state or elsewhere in the education system. The nuance that comes into play is Wyoming, as you all know, is a 100% reimbursement state for those costs. So the question was always, is the juice worth the squeeze for districts to become billing entities, et cetera? And we've worked with them over the past several years to try to build that capacity and make it as easy as possible in districts where it makes sense. There's a higher volume of Medicaid eligible children, and we can offset cost that then can be booked back to school financing. So I think we're in the process of proving a concept, so to speak, that could grow in the future. But again, it's a relatively small rollout at this point, and we continue to work with districts to onboard them to offset those costs.
Any final questions for the department? Mr. Richards?
Madam Chairman, just a item of interest for the committee to contemplate. Based upon the introductory comments of the agency, and I believe the director is referring to this as the Franz Fuchs graphic. You already have an existing footnote that will need to be modified if you choose to pursue the governor's recommendations. Specifically, the footnote provides that the first $39 million of reversions from this biennium shall be deposited into the state hospital demolition account. The governor's recommendation, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, is contemplated that 15 of the $39 million would be deposited into the demolition account, and the balance would be used for the purposes specified in his request.
Did everybody get that, or would you like him to say it one more time? I always like twice. Can you give me those numbers again?
Madam Chairman, the footnote provides that the first $39 million of reversions from this biennium should be deposited into the Wyoming State Hospital demolition account. The governor's recommendations and the department's analysis is contemplated that the first $15 million be deposited into that account, and all subsequent funds be used to support his recommendations for things like Title 25 facilities, support, and Medicaid.
Thank you. Final comments?
Madam Chairman, thank you. Just very briefly, some final comments. I've been with the agency for 10 years. and had the opportunity to join some of my other health directors last week in our nation's capital to, number one, complain at the feds who we gathered to get them to act in our best interest. But number two, to update and brief on things that we're doing in the states. And over the last 10 years, I've seen many different things happen in the Wyoming Department of Health and health policy in general across our state that you all did and often fail to recognize because it takes so long to implement some of these things that frankly, some of my counterparts in other states were watching and in some cases were jealous of. The rebuilding and reforming of our technology system in Medicaid, which Jesse Springer and our folks at Healthcare Financing Division have pioneered, is something that is the envy of some states and how we've procured those advanced technologies to do our jobs better. Your work to rebuild our state hospital, our Life Resource Center in a completely new way, where the Life Resource Center is providing care to folks with developmental disabilities and significant behaviors in a model that nobody else is doing, greenhouse-like and sharing clients with the state hospital. Our veterans home, which we opened this year to provide our veterans with nursing home care in a greenhouse model that I was up in Buffalo 2 weeks ago and saw the benefits and the beauty of that model with how those residents were being served. In addition to that, that facility, if we do our jobs right, will make money. It will cash flow positive so that we can discount private pay rates for those vets that are in need of nursing home care. Our behavioral health redesign that you all legislated 2 years ago that I think is really an opportunity for the state to be at the forefront of how we care for the most vulnerable and provide mental health services and pay for outcomes. Our providers, I'm really grateful for working with us the past couple of years to get close to implementing that in July of next year. There's just some things that you all have done over the years in the legislature in and outside of our budget that are absolutely paying dividends, and we see them and our staff see them every day. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the investment you've made in state employee compensation, not for selfish bureaucrats like myself in Cheyenne, but the impact it has boots on the ground in our facilities who take care of society's most vulnerable. It's very well received and something you don't hear thank you enough on a daily basis. So you should know a lot of those efforts that take so long to implement are things that are absolutely bearing fruit for the state of Wyoming. Wanted to close with a little bit of optimism after we slogged through a $2 billion budget. Madam Chairman, members of the committee, really appreciate the time today.
Thank you so much, Director. Appreciate hearing from you. Appreciate you being on time, under budget. All right, committee, because we have a little bit of time, Representative Walters has a bill draft he'd like to share with us. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the working draft 24 LSO 0253, working draft .4. And this is in regards to public health nursing. And committee, my hope would be to have this become a joint appropriations committee sponsored bill. And the meat of the bill is on the top of page 2. Lines 2 through 7, and it says when compensation to state public health nursing employees is increased, the department shall determine a corresponding increase to contract amounts for counties providing public health nursing services under paragraph Romanet A3 of this section, and request this increase in the department's standard budget request. And this really is what we were discussing in the public health nursing section, page 190 through 192 of the department's budget when we went through their budget. And it's for those counties that have taken on the model of using a county health in partnership with the state health department versus state health department providing public health nursing completely. And so as we discussed it, as they went through the budget, when they take on that role, their contract basis gets frozen in time essentially at 65% and 35% of the amount paid at that point in time. And so it never allows for the opportunity to increase based on inflation and other impacts. And so the negative impact in these counties is that their employees can't pay competitively with what the state is paying. And honestly, the other option is they go back to the state model, which costs the state far more than increasing this incrementally as it goes. So any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. The director might be happy to correct all my mistakes, but that's the goal, is to just update this and allow it to function a little more smoothly.
Questions for the representative? Anticipated fiscal note? I'll get-
I move the bill.
Well, this is questions for the representative. Co-Chairman Nicholas has moved the bill. He is, well, here's the deal.
I move the bill first.
I'll chair the meeting. Co-Chairman, Representative, thank you. I'm asking questions of the committee on Representative Walters' bill draft. I ask a question if you have an estimated fiscal impact.
Madam Chair, I do. To answer the question, and this is based on what was brought up during the agency hearing, roughly $387,464.
The biennial number.
I believe that's a biennial number.
Are there any additional questions for the representative from the committee? Seeing none. Department of Health,
Madam Chairman, just happy to stand for questions on that.
prudent. Any additional questions from the public or comments? Seeing none, public comment is closed.
Move the bill.
Moved by Co-Chairman Nicholas, seconded by Representative Henderson. Further discussion on the bill draft. Seeing none, roll call.
Members of the committee, the motion is on 24 LSO 0253, working draft 0.4. Representative Henderson. Representative Larson. Representative Sherwood. Representative Stith.
Aye.
Representative Walters.
Aye.
Representatives Juanes Dave. Senator Anderson. Senator Guru.
Excused.
Senator Kinsky. Senator Salazar. Co-Chairman Nicholas. Chairman Nathercott.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, the bill has insufficient votes to proceed.
We'll hold the vote open if it's okay with the co-chair. and
Vote will not stay open.
Senator Guru
We'll be back in January
can vote.
and we'll allow for more public comment. I know there was additional counties that wanted to provide public comment due to the late timing of it being on the agenda. Those individuals and entities cannot provide public comment. Votes closed, the bill failed. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 2. All right, this meeting is coming back to order. The time is 2:22. We now have in front of us the Department of Workforce Services, agency number 53. Welcome, Director Cooley. It's good to see you and your team. Welcome. Go ahead and please proceed.
Madam Co-Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, members of the committee, my name is Robin Cooley, and I'm the Director of the Wyoming Department of Workforce Services. It's a real pleasure to be here in front of you today to speak to our budget, and I'd like to start off by introducing you to some of the individuals we've got here at the table with me and in the galley. I've got Liz Gagan, our Deputy Director, here to my right, CFO Robin Martin, Administrator Holly McCamey-Simone, and I also have Administrator Jason Wolf back here, Administrator Ivy McGowan-Castleberry, and we have a new person here with us. Our State Mine Inspector, Heather Krupa, is with us today as well. She hasn't seen a meeting like this before, and so we invited her and thought it'd be something she needed to take a look at and experience.
Welcome.
So with that introduction, and if it pleases the committee, I'd like to give you a little bit of a narrative background that sets the stage for our requests here today in our budget. And then I would ask CFO Robin Martin to then walk us through our exception requests if that works for the committee.
Sounds great.
To begin with, as you know, I know you're hearing from your constituents, and we're hearing from them as well about the need for workforce across the state. Whether it's bringing individuals from outside the state in, whether it's upskilling individuals we have in the state, whether it's working with our individuals in junior high and high school to provide them on-the-job training around the state, the need for workforce is significant. It's significant across the country. And I want to talk to you about some data points that were quite startling to us that really set the stage for our requests. Comparing basically what's fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 2023, employment grew in Wyoming by 2.5%, but what that really breaks down to is 6,814 more jobs in the state of Wyoming. We also increased the number of businesses in Wyoming by 1,024 new businesses around the state. And this is the number that really took me back. We have increased in the state of Wyoming wages paid to Wyoming workers over $1 billion. Now, of course, that's new businesses, that's upskilling existing employees, but that's also those new employees that we have been hiring and paying out there to $1 billion new dollars in wages being paid to Wyoming workers around the state. So with these more than 1,000 additional businesses across the state, the Wyoming Department of Workforce Services touches every single one of them, whether that's registering with us for workers' compensation, for unemployment. It's touching them when they come into the workforce service because they need workers. We're working with each and every one of these businesses at some point, and we hope to be working with each and every one of their workers at some point as well. We've implemented, again, an incredible number to me, and a number of new programs across the state in order to address that need. And I'd like to give you some numbers there too, because once we sat down and really started working through it, it was something, again, a number that really took me back. We've implemented over the last couple of years over 24 new programs, initiatives, and grants in the state of Wyoming to help address the need for workers and workforce and upskilling existing workforce across the state. What that breaks down to is 11 new programs in our workforce centers. Our vocational rehabilitation program has one new program that's going to span 5 years to the tune of $10 million additional dollars to help our vocational rehabilitation individuals out there find and keep and really upskill in their existing careers. Our business training and support unit implemented 8 new programs, and our unemployment insurance program implemented 4 new grant programs. The critical point to make there is that we've done that. We might have gotten an AWAC to help us begin implementation, but the real boots on the ground implementation of these programs was done with existing workforce. No additional bodies in our workforce centers, in our unemployment claims office, anywhere in order to implement these new programs. With the training efforts that we've made, I also wanted to point out that over the last year, fiscal year 2023, we were helped to fund training for 2,000 existing employees to gain additional skills in their job. In other words, to upskill in their existing jobs. We provided on-the-job training for 374 internships and 68 apprenticeships across the state as well. And I want to tell you, with the applications that we received, we could have doubled that, if not tripled that number. Those are the types of application numbers that we saw in that program. Additionally, we've been working with numerous stakeholders, associations, businesses in other states, working with them on other potential projects coming into the state of Wyoming. Those are projects that are going to be critical to the state, including in areas of critical need around nuclear, hydrogen, water, solar, broadband, manufacturing, tech hubs, brownfields, healthcare, childcare, and general energy projects, to name a few. Those are some of the industries we are working with just to help start that conversation around new applications and new businesses that might come into the state. We're also working with the Industrial Siting Council on some of their permitting information. When they get those permits in, we actively look at what the social impact to communities is by looking at what they believe will be the impact to workforce in those areas, and look at our own numbers so we can make a comparison with that. The opportunities coming into Wyoming are incredible, and we want to make sure that we are out there meeting that need, helping businesses to be successful in the state of Wyoming. But I have to say that at this point, in order to do that, we're going to need some help. We're going to need some personnel, and we're going to need some additional dollars to do that. We very much want to do it. We've got a passionate group of people in our agency that's capable of doing that, but we need some more help in order to do that, because we really are reaching our bandwidth total of what we can do now with all the new programs we've already implemented. So the exception requests that you see before you really represent our agency's thoughtful assessment of what our needs are to meet those needs of both workers and businesses in Wyoming. And we hope that you will you believe so as well. And with that, I'm going to ask CFO Martin to please start going through the exception budget requests for us. Thank you.
Questions for Director Cooley before we transition over to those exception requests? 1,000 new businesses, that's a lot. And that doesn't mean necessarily corporate filings, right, with the Secretary of State's office, but is this businesses on the ground, or where are you getting that number of 1,000 new businesses?
Madam Co-Chair, or Madam Chair, those are businesses that are registering with our workers' compensation and unemployment insurance office. So whether they need workers' compensation, they still have to register with us. So those are actual new businesses across the state that we are registering with those two programs.
It's pretty significant. Representative Larson?
That caught my interest too, Madam Chairman, and I'm just curious, as 1,000 business, then what does that represent in new employees? So 1,000 businesses, that equates to that, is that 1,000 employees, or is that 20,000?
Director, if you know.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, the new number of employees that we had during the same time, and I don't know if it was all related to those new businesses, the new numbers was 6,800 new jobs in Wyoming.
And follow up, Madam Chairman, if I may. So, Director Cooley, I'm on a number of committees or whatever we want to call them regarding regionalization and in-state development of nuclear resources. And the common theme that we hear across the nation is the nuclear industry talks about anticipated expansion is the need for qualified workforce. And the biggest challenge for relocating industries to an area is the lack of that workforce. So with what we've been doing over the last couple of years, where do you think Wyoming is at in that little nuance thing that you've been focusing on nuclear and strategizing to put workforce in place? How do you think that stacks us against the other states that are competing for that business?
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, I think we are poised to take off in that area. I think if you look at, we've been on several work groups that from the get-go with that announcement, they started planning, they started developing programs. You've got the University of Wyoming walking down that road with new curriculum that they're developing. You've got Dr. Kim Dale in Rock Springs with the community college there doing the same thing. I believe we're in discussions routinely with those organizations to ask them, what does your workforce look like? You know, is it your initial building, your initial construction workers? What does that look like? But then once those are actually launched and moving forward, what does it look like then for the workforce there? We're still trying to work through that because I think there's still some juggling back and forth what the real need is going to be in areas like engineering and the plant management and that. But we are walking down that road with them, and I think we've been successful at getting across the point that Wyoming is here to ensure that when you launch those programs, when you launch those plants, we're going to be here walking with you to have those programs in place to help train those employees.
All right, let's start with those budget exceptions.
Thank you. Madam Chairman and the rest of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to present our budget and exception requests today. As Director Cooley indicated, I am Robin Martin. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Workforce Services, and I'm going to be walking you through our 13 exception request priorities. I'd like to begin on page 12, where you will find our exception request priorities table. What you will see is that we have requested a total of $22.9 million and that the governor has carefully considered these requests and has recommended approval of $17.7 million of those requests. We have made every effort to be intentional with how we prioritize these for your review. In addition, we have 5 position adjustments which align our efforts to continue to utilize these positions where they are needed most, and they align units and/or funding for budget purposes. These do net decrease our general funds by $35,000.
If you could move that mic a little closer.
If you could go with me to page 19, please. Our first request, this is the Office of Director unit. This is a position adjustment, which is moving one position and its funding from Unit 201 to Unit 101. On the next page is the TRP for this unit, totaling $22,347. Moving along, on page 26, our next request can be found in our Policy Research and Communications unit. This is another position adjustment, which was identified as requiring a correction from Unit 501.
Representative?
Previous one, is this the receiving end?
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, no. If you would like, I can give you the mirroring pages along.
Yeah.
Okay. So this one will be mirrored on page 151.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. As we continue on page 27, this position adjustment is a correction from Unit 150 to 110, and this will be mirrored on page 63.
Again, page?
Page 63.
Thank you.
I'll try to be a little louder. And finally, on page 28 for this unit is our TRP request for $2,903. Okay, jumping ahead to page 36, this is our business training and support unit. This request is to increase training dollars that go directly into the community and these programs designed to train workforce. We have seen an overwhelming increase in need across the state and continually hear positive feedback on these programs. This budget exception request includes 3 program staff positions and 1 fiscal position. I will point out that our request was originally for 10.9 million, and the governor has recommended approval of the ongoing amount of 8.2 million and 3 out of the 4 FTEs as requested.
Co-chairman?
So could you go into a little bit more specifics? You talk about there's an overwhelming increase in need across the state for programs. What are you talking about? What overwhelming need do you find? And obviously, you know, we have 8 community colleges that do exactly this. And there's other types of programs that do this. So how are you differentiating what you do and how you do it? And describe what you plan to do with the dollars.
Director?
Madam Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, thank you for Mr. Co-Chair Nicholas. Thank you for the question. This is our training from program. We are training existing employees to upskill them in their existing jobs. It's internship programs to get individuals into those on-the-job training opportunities. And it's the apprenticeship programs. So when we talk about the data shows with internships, for example, when we get interns into a job, 50% of those interns will stay with that particular employer and stay in Wyoming. So how this was started was through the University of Wyoming with the students there, connecting them with jobs in Wyoming to show them that there are good jobs in Wyoming that are in the area they're interested in, so that we can help them come to the conclusion that they can stay in Wyoming and have a good job. So those are the 3 main programs there. But I will also point out to you, we've got a couple of other programs in that area where if you get a new employer that comes into Wyoming and they need to develop that workforce, and we've had several of these over the past 3, 4, 5 years, they recognize they don't have existing skilled workforce, although we do have people that are interested in the jobs. We can get them into, before the business even opens, we can get them into a training program, get that workforce skilled up, so the minute that business opens, they've got a skilled workforce there. We are working directly with the community colleges, and in fact, a lot of our programs are working with their curriculum to help fund that curriculum. For instance, the apprenticeship, HVAC, plumbing, electrical. We're helping fund those programs with those apprenticeships in there so that they're getting that on-the-job training. So that's the connection with the community colleges. We also worked with the University of Wyoming on their construction management program, helping to fund that. And we're also helping them expand that program into the high school so that they can capture those kids in high school that have an interest in construction and provide them some on-the-job training so then that they're interested in perhaps going to the University of Wyoming and going into that construction management program. So what this program is really, it's that funding mechanism for businesses and for the community colleges to help develop that curriculum for these individuals.
Co-Chair.
Just to follow up first, and I see on page 34, your estimated cost for the was 9.2 million, which was quite a bit more than 21, 22, or in the estimated cost in 25, 26. So I'm just trying to understand that figure. Is that from COVID dollars? Is that from other dollars?
Madam Co-Chair, Madam Chair, Representative Nicholas, these funds are actually interest off of the state UI trust fund. So we're asking to supplement those funds that come off of that state UI trust fund that actually fund it now, to fund with some general fund dollars so that we can really increase the ability to fund the applications coming in. I will tell you, the applications coming in that we have to deny right now will more than take up the requested money that we've asked for in this exception request. There's that large of a need.
Senator Kinsky.
So to put too fine a point on it, most of the time, at least in Sheridan, that these training opportunities are funded, it's through the community college, but we don't fund the community colleges to go out and train a workforce in an employer's office to upskill to a certain type of welding or something. So this is the source of funding. The training is provided by the community college most of the time in Sheridan. So I think you answered my question because it says general fund, and I thought that this program was entirely driven off of the earnings from the unemployment insurance. But this is general funds. This is not interest off the UI, correct?
Director.
Madam Chair, Senator Kinsky, that's correct. And we're asking for that because of the need that we see out there in the requests. I believe Administrator McKamey Simone has some additional information on that as well.
If I could just follow on just very quickly before that, and this may help. So what are the training dollars currently thrown off by the Workforce Development Training Fund now?
11.7 million.
Madam Chair, Senator Kinsky, on a biennium basis, it's because it's an investment, it does fluctuate. It's around $2 million.
Okay.
Follow-up, Senator Kinsky.
No, thank you.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Stiff.
Director Cooley, is part of the reason it spiked up to $9 million in this last biennium that we changed the eligibility for employers. It used to be that employers could get reimbursed for up to $13 an hour. Then we changed it to make it up to, I think, $25 an hour, made it a much more generous program. And so employers then could hire these interns and get paid, $20 an hour, right? So essentially this is a subsidy to businesses, and is that why it's become so popular in your view?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Stiff, that is accurate. That's part of the reason it's become so popular. But I think what we're hearing back from both the interns and the employers, because we've had to reduce those amounts because with the budget that was reduced, we've heard such good input from them, regardless of the reduction in the amounts that we could pay, whether it's a win-win because they were able to retain that employee because they get to try each other out. So it's a win-win that way, but it's also a win-win, again, showing our community of young individuals what the opportunities are in Wyoming, and even potential what the opportunities are going to be in Wyoming, so that their thought process changes around leaving the state to find those jobs, just maybe staying in the state because we've got good jobs out here available for them.
Madam Chairman, follow-up.
Follow-up, Representative.
Director Cooley, is there any way to measure to what extent we're displacing what the private sector would have done anyway? In other words, for some employers, they would have hired this person at $21 an hour anyway because they need them. But this program lets them get free wages for a certain amount of time. Is there any way to measure the extent? Because, for example, just in general, if we're fixing a market failure, then that's a good use of public funds in my view. If we're just subsidizing employers for money they would have spent anyway, that's not such a great use of public funds. So any thoughts on that?
Director.
Representative Stiff, that's a really good question. I think I can respond to it mainly by saying the internships, I think, especially those internships that were implemented through the college with some of those college individuals and businesses. I don't think those are cases where those individuals would have hired them. It has to be a structured learning experience. So there's skin in the game for the employer. And there's reporting requirement. So is it a benefit to them? Absolutely, because, paying those salaries. But at the same time, it's work for them as well. It's not just hiring an individual. So I think there's enough of a difference there with the requirements of the program that I think we can say it really is facilitating that exchange of information, that exchange of the good jobs that are out there and available if you want to stay in Wyoming.
Follow-up, Representative?
I have a follow-up.
Co-chairman?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. So going back to your charts on page 34, it looks to me like you spent down the balance of the fund, basically $31,000. And so, and that had been accumulating over the years. So you had a balance of 55 million in 1920, 6.8 in 21-22. And you were basically, but then in 23-24, you spent 9 million. So you spent everything that you had in the pot, basically.
Correct.
And now you're trying to refill that pot up to that equivalent amount, roughly, in order to continue the work that you've done in this biennium.
Is that a question
Is that right?
or a comment?
Madam Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, that's accurate to the extent that this was a pilot project. When we started this, we did have an additional fund in that pot. We had no idea, we had no way to know what the impact was going to be or the interest was going to be in that program. We did very little marketing. It was done word of mouth more than anything, with some of our social media as well. And the word spread around like that in a significant way that took us all a little back. So we quickly regrouped. We reduced some of those funding pots, but I can tell you right now, we're still getting the numbers of applications that we were getting at the height of this, even with the lowered amounts now.
Madam Chair, follow-up.
Co-chairman?
So I'm curious, could you provide us with kind of like a spreadsheet of how much went where? And obviously we need some type of a mechanism to authenticate the value of your expenditures. In other words, some type of a performance mechanism to say, we did this here in this set of the three that you talked about, how they worked, where the money was spent, and your overall return on the dollars, and so the benefits you provided. And so to me, if we're going to start funding this at 10 million a year, we need to have results and kind of report on the process. So does that just makes sense to me?
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Nicholas, we did submit an annual report that runs through dollars spent, applications, funded applications that could not be funded, industries they were funded in across the state, counties where they were spent, and we will get that annual report to you. It was submitted September 1st of this year. We'll get that report to you.
So let me just follow up. Don, has that already been submitted to us? So we don't have to reinvent the wheel?
To whom was it submitted?
When was it?
To whom?
We submitted it to the entire legislature.
So could you just have it recirculated to us, please? That way you don't have to do anything.
Great, thank you.
Co-Chair.
Senator Kinski?
So I just want to follow up the $2 million Workforce Development Training Fund. You're seeking $10 million to administer it? Or are you going to add more than $2 million in there? It's just, it's a $2 million fund and you've got a proposal for $10 million in additional funding out of the general fund for Workforce Development Training Program. I'm confused.
Director?
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Kinski, $9.4 million actually goes to training fund dollars. And we've got that broken down on page 36 of the budget. But the large majority of that money goes out in training fund
Okay,
dollars.
that's 626. Thank you.
Any follow-up?
Nope.
Madam Chairman.
Seconds. Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, I think this is a lot of good news. You've mentioned a couple times that there are multiple, lots of applicants. I'm sure that there's public and private entities who want to participate. Is there a way to know what the size of the waiting list is? How many are in the line? All their things constant, if we had the funds available, could process the applications and bring the intern and the entities together. Is there a way to know what that volume is? Okay, and then also, of the ones who have completed the intern process, how many have resulted in a job or, in Wyoming?
And Director, if that's in the report,
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Henderson, part of that is in the report. We show in the report how many applications were submitted that could not be funded. We are still gathering data on the numbers of individuals that might have received job offers after that. I will ask, I believe Administrator Simone has some additional information she wants to share too. Go ahead.
Administrator?
Madam Chair, Representative Henderson, I did ask the team to pull some data for us, and right now, on average, we're receiving 100 applications each month for our training grants, and that's all of our training grants. The average dollar amount that's requested each month is $500,000 per month, and the average that we're able to approve is around $100,000 to $150,000 per month. So over the course of a year, just doing simple math here, we could approve $6 million a year if we funded all of those requests, or $12 million a biennium.
Representative Henderson, follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So given that information, what number of businesses or entities would we expect connected with that volume? Given what you know, how many businesses does that connect to? Because you can have up to 5. I understand you can have up to 5 per business, right, per year.
Madam Chair, Representative Henderson, so are you speaking particularly about the internship grant? Okay. I don't have an exact breakdown of how many businesses applied for the internships. That 100 per month was all of our training grants, but I can get that for you, sir.
Committee members, in SharePoint is that annual report. If you just search it, you can find it as well. I found it. Director, please proceed.
Madam Chairman, if I could continue, we will turn to page 38. This is our priority number 4 for a program called Why Relocate, which will be dedicated to the expansion of the Wyoming workforce across all industries. The focus will be to promote, educate, and market the benefits of working and living in Wyoming to potential job seekers outside of the state. This request does include 1 program manager. And I will note that our request was originally for $4 million, and the governor has recommended the approval of $1.7 million. If there are no questions, I'll move forward to page 40. This is the TRP request for this unit, $5,805. Next, we're going to be looking on page 57.
Representative Larson?
Page 40.
40?
So, Madam Chairman, did we talk about priority 4? Which is is that the relocate one?
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, yes, it is.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And so, any concern on the governor's rec where we approve 1.6 ongoing and the 3 million one-time, and then the denial of the 2.3. Am I saying that accurately?
It's 3,000.
Or 3,000, I'm sorry. 3,000 one time is submitted. Does that still work for you?
Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, we've looked at that. What we would like to do with that is with that initial $1.697 million, start getting the program set up with an IT component to it that uses LinkedIn. We wrap in our Wyoming Grown program into that. We know other states that are doing that. Colorado, for one, out of Denver, has something very similar, and we know North or South Dakota is doing it as well with some ads out there. What we'd like to do is get the program set up, get started down that road, and take a look at from there what we might want to add on to that for relocation. You know, our initial proposal in that area included relocation funds. And I think that was where maybe the concern was. We don't really know what it is. When we launched this during COVID with the Office of Tourism and the Business Council, we had an overwhelming response. We weren't quite ready for it, in fact, and didn't have enough bodies to really follow up on the individuals that did contact us. So we'd like to start out small with that, see what the response is, and then ask and really dig into what it is that those individuals are looking for in order to relocate to Wyoming. So I think starting at this point with a tech option that gets us out there, that wraps in the Wyoming Grown program and starts looking across our borders at what it is individuals are looking for, I think that's a good start for us with this program.
Follow up, Madam Chairman.
Follow up.
So I know what I think relocate means, and so when you say relocation funds, what is the intent of that verbiage in this program?
Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, it was the proposal initially was relocation funds to help them move to the state, in other words.
So we'd help fund their move.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Madam Chair.
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on to page 40 in your TRP request, and really I bring this up for all of your TRP requests just to make sure I fully understand. If I read your everything correctly, you are requesting a total of 542 computers throughout the agency, 200 in the unemployment unit and 342 in the rest of the agency on a 4-year cycle. But that's almost a new computer for basically every employee in 2 years. So just a little better understanding of why the high need, if we're on a 4-year cycle, it should be about half that. And taking this particular one as the opportunity to ask the question, but it rolls through the whole budget.
What page are you on, Representative?
Madam Chairman, just using the page 40, priority 13 TRP request as the opportunity to ask the question, and then I had to go look in the ETS book that provided us with agencies' various requests to find out that there is 200 computers being requested in the UI division within this agency, as well as 342 within the remainder of the agency, for a total of 542 computers. And they list 554 employees in their base budget. So that's essentially a new computer for everyone in the office in 2 years versus a 4-year replacement cycle as stated. So just trying to better understand this.
Madam Chairman, Representative Walters, My understanding, with the exception of UI, is that we're replacing 342 units with 407 staff. I do need to get more information on UI in particular. As I understand it, we have some computers for our software vendor and potentially a couple for surplus, but I need to get you specific numbers on the UI program.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Anderson?
Something's the matter with my math on this. We've got $5,805 and you're getting 300 and some computers. I don't understand this. I don't understand how this works.
Yeah,
He went to ETS then, but why does theirs look different?
Madam Chairman, Senator Anderson.
Not that he looked. No, more than that. He just looked deeper.
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, Senator Anderson. So for this particular unit, we're replacing 4 items in this ask. So we've got TRP replacements across the agency in various units.
So, Madam.
Will this be later in the budget, another TRP?
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna get to that with an explanation of those additional computers. That's the answer to Senator Anderson.
He was just trying to confuse me with all those numbers.
That's right.
I see.
And so as we do this, Madam Co-Chair, what we'd like to know is why do you need to replace 500 computers in 2 years? And probably to do that, we need to know what you replaced last year, because we do this every biennium and basically every supplemental. And so you've already are in the replacement cycle. So you should have that data so we can see what's out there, what's replaced, and that information.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, that's partly on me. We had staff out for vacation last week and I had numbers on every unit except for UI. And I think they had some individual circumstances, but I can get you a breakdown of each unit and the numbers.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Keep
Madam
going.
Chairman. Okay, if we could all turn to page 57, please. This is our employment and training unit and this is our #1 priority for the agency. This request is to adjust funding for 26 staff from federal funds to general funds, along with their associated costs. During the budget cut process, DWS had to reduce its general fund by almost $4.3 million. This request is in part a clawback of those cuts and gets funding back where we need it to meet the demand and level of service. By funding these with general funds, they become part of our indirect costs and recouped with federal dollars through the indirect cost rate.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Walters? Or Representative Stitt?
Madam Chairman, thank you. So help me understand this. I do remember doing this a couple of years ago when we shifted some of our general fund onto the federal funds. But just generally, why is it a good idea to unwind that? Or I see in the table, it looks like you're showing reduced U.S. Department of Labor grants, for example, of about $3.8 million or so. Is the grant actually getting lower, or are you allocating those funds to a different unit somewhere else?
Madam Chairman, Representative Stith, so our funding through the U.S. Department of Labor is either flat or decreasing over time. So this just puts those individual employees that were previously funded through general funds that we switched over to federal funds through the budget cut process back to where they were originally funded through the general fund.
So, Madam Chair, maybe I'm just not understanding, but do you expect the U.S. Department of Labor grants to actually go down by $3.8 million? Or is it just that you're going to take that money and put it someplace else?
If you're referring, Mr. Chair, or Madam Co-Chair, Representative Stith, to the decrease in the overall authority, that's just to true up our authority to not show that we're receiving more grant fund dollars than we actually do.
Okay, so Madam Chairman, in the narrative, it talks about having to close 2 workforce centers in the state. And so I guess help me understand, because to me, we've always, typically what we like to do is push off our liabilities onto somebody else, like the federal government, right? And this is going the reverse direction, where we're taking on obligations that the federal government has been paying for. Why is that a good idea?
Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Stitt, what has happened when we had budget cuts was we transferred over those funds so that we didn't have to cut positions, and we then were able to give back general fund monies. What also happened with that, though, is there were less funds out there, federal funds out there, than to pay money for client services. What this does is put us back where we were before, so that those Department of Labor funds can now be used for client services, which, as we all know, client services have dramatically gone up. Whether it's, and that's part of the reason for the closure of 2 workforce centers. We've also gone to our Wyoming Workforce Development Council, the Governor's Council, in order to request funding from them to help pay for services across the state. So that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get money back into the system so that we can help continue to pay for those services in the workforce centers that we provide across the state, whether that's rapid response initiatives, it's job fairs, it's all of the above that we're providing in those workforce centers. If that helps answer that question. We're putting it back where we were, so the money goes to services instead of administration.
Co-chairman, or was there any follow-up, Representative Stiff? Okay, co-chairman.
You know, in part, it's kind of a clawback for the cuts that we did, similar to the step 2, step 3 in the Department of Health. Is that a fair characterization?
Director.
Madam Chairman, yes, that's correct, Representative Nicholas.
And so could you be specific on how much was taken from you and how much you were asking back, just so we can kind of have a running balance of where maybe you want to get to, or where you were at one point in time?
Representative Larson. I'm assuming you don't know the answer to that right away, but let me just do a follow-up with Representative Larson.
Well, and this goes along with that, Madam Chairman, and I'm just, is this the step 2 and step 3 cuts, or it doesn't say which 3 budget cuts we're referring to? So are we in back to 15, 16 when we done it then, or which ones, please?
Where do you want to go with the budget?
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, I will answer that it was the 21-22 supplemental budget cuts that we're replacing. The other question that is on the table is that we had cut those general funds by $4.3 million, and this general fund ask is 5.3 and some change.
Director.
Madam Chairman, I would also indicate, though, we have to use some of those funds for the compensation increases that we received as well. Thank you for that. It was a wonderful thing. It made a difference to our staff, but this is also in order to take into account for that. So what we need to get to you now is what amount of that is for the budget cuts and what amount of that is for compensation increase and other increases that we've seen, as I understand.
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, are we ready for the next request? On page 60, this request is our priority number 9. This is for a senior community service employment program position. This work is currently being done by an outside vendor, and this request is to bring the program in-house, which will allow for more oversight of the program. This federal program provides training for low-income, unemployed seniors to gain skills necessary to help them with unsubsidized employment.
Questions on this? Representative Larson?
Is the contractor currently funded from the same source and at the same amount? Or are we just switching the funding or the duties back to the agency using the same fund for the same amount? Thank you.
That answer was yes.
Yes, thank you.
For the record that I'm accustomed to making.
Our next request is on the next page, 62. This is our priority number 11, which adds re-employment services and eligibility assessment to our standard budget. This program is a collaboration of our workforce centers and unemployment insurance, which is an immediate benefit that aims to get individuals reemployed and off of UI. This grant is a new program for our agency, but is expected to be ongoing. The B11 originally requested an AWAC, but we are requesting an FTE. The ideal candidate would need to be in the workforce center, and they don't typically accept an AWAC position, and this makes filling positions quite challenging. If there are no questions, I'll move to the next page, 63. This position adjustment is a mirror to the request on page 27, moving from unit 150 to 110. On the next page, 64, this is a mirror request position adjustment that will be found on page 106. On the next page, 65, this is the TRP request for this unit, replacing 92 units, totaling $133,520. Okay, we'll flip on to page 79. This is our state mine inspector unit. This is our TRP request totaling $10,159 for 7 units. Okay, moving along to page 101. This is our first exception request for our vocational rehabilitation program. This is our number 3 priority. We're asking for $2.5 million in general funds and the authority increase of $2.6 million in federal authority. With this request, DWS will be able to fully draw down its entire federal award, which is currently $12.2 million. Historically, our agency has never been able to fully draw down the federal award due to lack of match dollars. For every $1 of match funding, we can draw down $3.69 in federal funds. We believe that this request aligns with the governor's mental health improvements initiative across the state. Vocational rehabilitation has seen an increase in the number of applicants and caseload sizes within the last 2 years. As an example, there are over 4,000 Wyoming students on an individual education plan, and vocational rehabilitation is only serving 800 of them due to limited funding. This request also includes 4 FTEs. However, we are not asking for the additional funding for these positions, as these positions will be pulled from the existing grant instead of contracted out. Bringing this function in-house will allow for better oversight and coordination of pre-employment transition services to youth.
Representative?
About 4,000 Wyoming students who are on IEP, and you only serve 800, because part of that being that some of them are still in elementary school.
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, those are our transition age students, so
Okay,
they
it doesn't, thank you.
Yes.
I thought that was across the board, and I was trying to figure out
Yeah.
how we was getting there. Okay. These are transitioning out of the K-12 system into the workforce.
So they're like high school age students, some a little bit in our junior
Thank
high age, yes.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. On page 104, you will find our number 8 priority exception request. This is moving an existing AWAC to an FTE. This position's job duties and functions are mission critical for the telecommunications relay service program. These are 100% other funds. On the next page, on page 105, this is our priority number 10, exception request for a vocational rehabilitation interpreter. The governor's deaf and hard of hearing report determined that Wyoming has limited resources related to providing interpretive services for individuals who are deaf and utilize sign language as their primary means of communication. This position is intended to fill that gap.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Larson?
And can you tell us how that would work? So you have, is it one serving the state? Would it be from here? And are you thinking tele? How does that going to work?
Can they be in this room at all times?
Yes, please.
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, It would be one position that coordinates all the interpreter services and would also be an interpreter themselves. So they would utilize our pool of interpreters and then as needed fill in as well.
I apologize. Could you share with us a little bit about the pool of interpreters? What does that look like and how many do we have?
Could you start signing for us? Show us what it looks like.
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, I myself am not an interpreter, but I know that it does take a lot of credentialing and education. Folk Rehab has a pool of interpreters that they work with on a contract basis, but I know that Department of Ed and different entities do as well. I could get you more information on that. Okay.
Senator Salazar?
Thank you. How often is this, this is of interest to me, how often is this used?
Madam Chair, Senator Salazar, how much are interpreters used?
Yeah, what are the number of customers that you have for this service?
Excellent question. I can get that for you. I don't have that in front of me, but I know that our services, especially in our tele-relay services, have dramatically increased during COVID and post-COVID. And so interpretation as well as closed captioning services are something that are being used more frequently.
All right, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. On page 106 is a continuation of position correction, which mirrors page 64 previously covered. And on the next page, 107, is a mirror position request to page 19. And on page 108, this is the TRP request for this unit totaling $36,253, replacing 25 units. 25. All right. Please proceed to page 121. We're moving into our unemployment insurance unit. This first exception request is Part B, which ties to our #1 priority request we discussed earlier, which was the employment and training correction from federal funds to general funds. This position in particular was moved some time ago from the UI division to E&T, or employment and training. So this is a correction in the funding and unit for that particular position. On the next page, 123, this is our priority #7. This is for an unemployment insurance position. In recent years, as Director Cooley indicated, UI has applied for and received additional grant funding. This has created a significant increase in fiscal responsibility and reports that are required. In addition, these programs are under a significant amount of scrutiny and an overall increase in audits. Without enough qualified staff, these programs are at risk of audit findings and potential loss of funding. This request is for an additional fiscal staff person to assist the small team of 5 and will be fully federally funded.
Co-chairman? No. This position will be fully federally funded.
That is correct.
It's always good.
Next, on page 135, this is the first of an exception. I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, just
Representative Walters?
a quick question on page 124, your TRP request, how many computers is that?
Madam Chairman, Representative Walters, thank you. Yes, this page 124 is the TRP request for this unit totaling $338,950. And I will follow up with you on number of units on that one.
Each unit is about $1,200. I'm gathering through the theme of the last 6 days.
Yeah.
So if we could take 338 divided by 1,200, does that math add up to the 500 and some? Sometimes I'm sharper than I let on. Representative Larson?
Madam Chairman, as we keep referring to that, I just wondered if we could, so TR, on these TRP requests, Are they on a 4-year cycle? Or are they on a 2-year cycle?
Should be 4.
And is that what we're doing here? So there isn't a confusion that they're not being replaced prematurely?
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, that's correct. In this particular instance, we run a scan on the agency to determine how many machines should be replaced based on the warranty cycle age of the machine. I think what you will find, some agencies will have a higher than normal replacement cycle due to CARES Act funding. So some agencies received an influx through CARES funding, federal dollars, those laptops so they can telework. We're now coming up on that 4-year cycle. So some agencies will see normal. So that's going to offset what we've traditionally seen of half and half per biennium. We now may see one biennium, they have a lot, and the next biennium, very little.
I just want to know how it is that we can hear him so clearly. Oh, he has a microphone? It is magic. I can barely hear the people sitting in front of me all day. Director Hibbert.
Madam Chair, thank you. Not necessarily this case in this particular unit, but I want to caution the joint appropriation that just mathematically using the number of positions in a particular unit to arrive at a relationship that you're replacing the proper number of computers doesn't include the thought of we've got laboratories out there, like in the library or SAO spoke of. So it could be a laboratory computer that they have.
And so for clarity on this request of the 500 plus computers you're asking for in this budget and as recommended by ETS, is it fair to say that there's no computer, generally speaking, no computer within the Department of Workforce Services that is less than 5 years old? Is that correct? Or have you had a massive replacement or a large replacement of computers within the last 5 years?
Madam Chairman, to be quite frank, we just, executive team just got some new computers. So I want to track it down for you. I don't know the answer to this. And I want to make sure we're being completely transparent with you.
I don't feel like you're not being transparent, just so that you know. We really like this question and we're asking every agency about it and really drilling down kind of on this topic. Really, it goes to whether or not this should be part of an ongoing budget request or these one-time funds, because knowing that ETS has this policy and every state computer is supposed to be replaced really every 4 years. You know, how do we manage that as an appropriation? And that's the why. Representative Walters? Want to pull out the ETS book? All right, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. On page 135, this takes us to our labor standards unit. The first priority on this page is number 5. This position was created during the 2022 budget session, House Bill 53. In that,
Madam Chair, on that, should this position actually just be part of your standard budget because that's what the bill stated it needed to do versus an exception request? Thoughts on that?
Madam Chairman, Representative Walters, that is my understanding now, having gone through the process, that yes, we'll work with the budget office going forward in similar circumstances, but yes, that is correct. Okay,
This is an EEO investigator to deal with the Wyoming Military Department. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
And that this position was funded in 2022, is that correct?
That is correct, Madam Chairman.
And so the position has been ongoing for the past year, is that correct?
That is correct.
How many investigations has that individual performed?
Madam Chairman, we had 5 initial investigations. Since that time, I do not believe we've had additional investigations.
Director Hibbert?
And Madam Chairman, whether changing the chairs, I just wanted to point out that on page 135, it says by the legislature was the funding and position be included in the agency's 2024 exception request in the standard budget going forward. So there's a point in time where we want to make sure that we have clarity in the aspect of what the intent of the legislature is in the budget. So sometimes what we'll do, if there's these bills that you put in place, we'll follow through with an exception request just simply to make sure that we're all on the same page. It's not to do anything more or less than that. But clearly the legislature intent is to do this. We're just documenting it and we're moving forward.
Thank you, Director. So can this position work on other types of investigations within the Department of Workforce Services?
Madam Chairman, I'm going to have Mr. Administrator Wolf respond with more information.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Jason Wolf, Administrator of Workforce Standards for the Department of Workforce Services. Yes, the answer to your question is this position can do the other investigations that we do within that unit. It is there to give priority to those military investigations / counselings that we do. There's a pretty strict timeline within the military department. Those have to be done, so they have to kind of be there to prioritize those.
So can you estimate, I understand based on the previous testimony that there were 5 reports, 5 investigations essentially. Are they closed? And if you can't speak specifically, that's fine.
So, Madam Chairman, I think just to differentiate an investigation versus what we call EEO counseling, the military department sets out 2 specific criteria. So we do EEO counseling, which is like a 90-day process where we try to come to some type of agreement between the complainant and the respondent. And then we've done 5 of those to date. And currently, since this was implemented, we have not had one go to a full-blown investigation at this time.
So I just want to speak to that briefly, in that we have created the legislature on its own. Well, we threw money at a problem politically to solve an issue, right? But there hasn't been one investigation that went to completion, so it does not justify a full-time employee. Recognizing that one investigation never justifies one employee. In fact, I would question how many investigations an average EEO investigator conducts to justify a full-time position.
It's about sticky.
And this is a legislative creation, I understand.
Madam Chairman, I think just to answer your question, typically what our other investigators do is, our main priority is wage claims as well as fair employment claims. We average around 430 wage claims per year. Currently, we have 8 compliance officers that do that work. And then average about 113 fair employment claims a year. And again, spread over those same 8 investigators. And I will tell you, just being on the topic, that of course you guys are probably aware that the wage claims not too labor intensive on our staff to investigate those. Those are closed usually within a 90-day time period. It is the fair employment claims that tend to be a little bit more drawn out, and they can take a bit longer to resolve that. If that answers your question.
No, it does. And I think that demonstrates the volume of work that those 8 individuals are doing, recognizing that those are varying complexities with those 526 tasks, workloads. Some of those investigations are pretty complex. I'm also assuming that this new employee that we created is supporting those 8, which they must be.
Madam Chairman, that's correct, yes.
That compensation for that individual conducting what I would consider complicated and legally complex workplace investigations doesn't seem to be adequate, in my opinion.
Madam Chairman, I I will reserve my opinion on that, but that is what it was classified as through the Department of Administration and Information. I will tell you that the director and I have had some discussions with Director Bach and her staff as far as the classification / pay grade. And that there may be some opportunity for like a desk audit study of that particular classification to see what that yields.
Yes, I think that's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Moving on to page 136. We did have a request for an additional compliance investigator within this unit. This division had reallocated 3 positions to other divisions during the 2020 budget cuts, and we've had to absorb the work of a program manager and administrative assistant. However, we are seeking another compliance officer position to put us back to those pre-pandemic levels and to ensure that we're making timely investigations and determinations. However, I must tell you that the governor did recommend denial of this exception request.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
Representative Sherwood.
Thank you. Could you walk me through the nuances of why this requested salary in priority 5 and then priority 6 for the labor standards position are different? Thank you.
And then Representative Henderson.
My question, thank you, Madam Chair. My question goes to during the period since the pandemic, I've seen that you've absorbed the manager and the admin assistant. How have the investigations been, if any?
And so there were 2 questions there, of course, one from Sherwood and one from Representative Henderson. If you could answer them both now.
Madam Chairman, I might defer to my colleagues on the amount of the difference in appropriation there. I'm not 100% sure why that is.
Madam Chairman, Representative Henderson, I will look into the differences and why those numbers are different, why they would be even remotely classified different.
And so additionally, kind of dovetailing on that, they shouldn't be different based on what they do, except one probably had some type of historical appropriation with it in that bill draft. In my view, I think it's unlikely that both proceed. So priority number 5, which of course is a political one, why it is recommended. If that person doesn't have enough work to do, as evidenced by the last year, and they are in fact authorized to do these initial investigations, do we really need priority number 6? Do you want 10 investigators?
So, Madam Chairman, I think maybe just a little bit of historical background on that is, as mentioned, we did absorb the work of a program manager, so about a 12-level person who oversaw that. That is now myself. We did already have 2 lead investigators within the unit who are now functioning as working managers, meaning they carry a caseload. It's just a little bit reduced because they also have personnel stuff that they have to manage. And then we did we did move another compliance officer during the 2021 budget cuts over to another unit, which that unit is still in need of that person. It hasn't waned. And then this had also one other, we were pretty heavy on the administrative side. We had 3 administrative people to help with some of the paperwork in that unit, which we felt was too much. So we did reclassify that person over to another duty within the workers' comp unit. And then because we didn't have the general fund appropriation to reclassify that from a 6-level administrative assistant to a 9-level compliance officer investigator. But I think just generally an answer to your question is, is this position needed? I would leave that to the wisdom of this committee. I will tell you that you know, the intent of this unit is to, as you are well aware, ease the burden on the court system. This is considered an administrative remedy that these complainants must go through on the fair employment side before they can, you know, sue their employer. The intent with this unit would be, you know, while there's no hard and fast deadline to have these investigations completed, a complainant can request what is called a right to sue letter after a period of 180 days. And then they have the right to go sue their employer for what they feel is they were wronged. Currently, those investigations are taking quite a bit longer than 180 days. Some up to a year or more, just depending on. So, I mean, that's just some historical background on the unit. I would say that the amount of, you know, investigations have remained pretty steady, with some ebb and flow to the amounts as far as pre-COVID and now. It's really the turnover in that small of a unit that creates a need for continuity of operations, if you will, and having consistently trained people to pick up where a case was left off.
Director?
Madam Chairman, I would also say that when we start getting complaints from constituents about the timelines that the time it's taking, that's when we want to take a look at that and really recognize, is it internal? Is it a training issue? Is it turnover? I think it's turnover, but I also think it's because of the number of investigations and the depth of the investigations that they're doing. So I would add to that we don't want to hear constituents, you know, being put in a spot where they're 180 or more days where they're waiting to get an investigation completed in order to know if they can move forward. So I think that also plays a role in that, is the complaints we've been receiving about it.
Director Hayward?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The explanation between the difference in the position that the legislature appropriated, which is on page 135, and the position on 136. The budget amount is predicated on a vacant position on page 135. And when we do budget requests, we ask you to provide MPP, market policy position. So vacant position and then market policy. It's just how we do budgeting.
All right, any additional questions on 135 and 136? All right, seeing none, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. On page 137, excuse me, this is a position adjustment correcting unit and funding for a position that was previously filled as a safety and health officer to better manage the agency's workers' compensation and safety efforts throughout the state. This will be mirrored on page 150. On the next page, 138, this is the TRP request for this unit, which totals $17,416, replacing 12 units. Next on page 150, this is the mirror request to the position correction I just mentioned for the safety person. On page 151, this is a mirror correction to page 26, correcting funding and unit from 501 to 110. And finally, on page 152, this is the TRP request for this unit totaling $256,880 for 177 units. And finally, on page 159, this is for our Disability Determination Services, Unit 601. This is for their TRP request totaling $8,708 for 6 units. And this concludes our exception request priorities, and I would be happy to answer additional questions.
Additional questions for the department? Chairman Nicholas, can we go back to the page for the workforce training?
Page
36.
Do you know what page that is?
36.
Yeah, Yeah. 30. So committee, this is what Co-Chairman Nicholas drilled in on and I think had commentary / questions about inquiry in, which I think is likely one of our biggest policy questions that the agency is asking us to make, which is the additional funding of this workforce training. And the question of, when we look at that expenditure on page 34, the historical expenditures, the decision to draw it down, obviously based on need in the state, which is the purpose of the fund. But what considerations were given to not draw it down so far? And it's fair that your purpose was to get those dollars out based on state need, but taking it virtually down to zero.
Madam Chairman, thank you for the question. And it's certainly a legitimate question, and it's one that was difficult. It was a difficult budget situation for us all the way around. This is a unique program to Wyoming. There aren't others in the country that we've been able to determine. Funding comes from investments off of a state UI trust fund that nobody else in the country has. We had reduced the amounts, at some point, the agency reduced the amounts for those training fund dollars. Senator Kinski asked us to take a 10-year look at that because he recognized that we had reduced those amounts, and we had $10 million in that account when we started down this road. When we started down this road, we didn't know what we were looking at. We hadn't even implemented the internship program at that time, actually. Or we might have just implemented it and it wasn't really taking off. I can't remember the timing on that. But we thought, what we wanted to do was over the span of the next year, do a pilot program, increase the amounts of money paid out to these individuals. We were coming out of COVID. We knew individuals and communities needed that money, and they needed money to get people into their workforce, to get those individuals interested in their jobs and training in their jobs. That was the impetus to get going down this road. We started down the road. We have an incredible team in that area that are incredibly well-tuned to what's going on. If an individual employer called in and had troubles with their application, we were hand walking them through those application processes. I mean, it was something that was really special in Wyoming because we were helping businesses coming out of COVID. And I want to tell you that I think it was the whole process of coming out of COVID why we probably spent the money that we did. When we recognized at some point we were spending that money, we put the brakes on it for, was it 1 month or 2 months actually, to see where we're at, because this is a process that is obligated up front with a contract. But you may or may not go to that full training. You may or may not have an intern that's going to spend all of that money. It's terribly difficult to budget it because there's so many what ifs in determining what is actually going to be spent. So at the end of the day, we spent a lot of money out of that. But at the end of the day, we know that we've got money coming in from those investment funds. But I think we did the right thing. We've got a budget in place right now for each month, for each program, and we're sticking to that budget. We've got the money for that, for that budget coming in. And this was our way to recognize that we also know that we've got additional training programs we need to implement out there. Representative Nicholas, just like you said, we've got the community colleges out there training our new workforce. We've got UW doing that. We even have private employers, private training entities out there doing that. But what we hear about are the training that's not going on out there. we hear about training companies that want to come into Wyoming and provide rural training, rural healthcare training online so that individuals can get training that are out in the rural reaches of Wyoming. We know they need it. We know they can use it. We know it would be a good job for them. But that's a training entity that we don't have any other way to pay for. So we've got ideas for other programs we want to implement as well that we think can make the difference for Wyoming in training our workforce. And that's the impetus of it. Hindsight's 2020. Should we shut it off at $6 million? Should we shut it off at $5 million? I don't know. But because of the way it is with an obligation and no way to know what was actually going to be spent, that's where we ended up.
Representative Larson.
Director Cooley, I think that this is kind of a not all one issue here. I think that it kind of has some legs here that go out, and I just want, but I may not be understanding it accurately, and so I'd like you to correct me. So it appears that in this workforce training, you found that the need was more than the resources you had. This request for administration is because you feel like you're deficient in the amount of administration to provide an overall workforce training program. Boom. So that's kind of the issue in the budget request. When we come back to the funding for workforce training, that's been out of two funds. It's revenue generated from the state required unemployment fund, which is invested in the pool, in the state agency pool checkbook. And so in a few minutes, we're going to be having a conversation about that. So how can we, as we've depleted those funds, how can we increase those funds without a burden on the state general fund? And I think you have a plan moving forward to invest those in pool A and get a higher rate of return with those earnings coming back into that. Likewise, with the federal state unemployment, you are able to divert a portion of those funds that come in from employers for unemployment insurance to this workforce training. As you've noticed the deficiency, but yet the solvency of that fund, can we divert more allowable employer premiums into workforce training? So you have a plan, it appears, as we read these bills, to increase the revenue available for training, but you need administrative capacity to get it accomplished. Am I seeing that? Where have I missed the boat?
Director.
Madam Chairman, you're spot on. We have a plan A and we've got a plan B. And if both of them pan out, that'd be absolutely incredible. General fund money that can get us going down that road, can get us really implementing a program that can make an incredible difference to the communities around this state. But we've also got a plan to, with the legislation we'll be talking about here very quickly, to put that state UI trust fund in pool A, which those investment funds will go right into this program, into this training fund program. We've also got another plan. Thank you to our Chris Funk, who's also back in the room and will be helping us with this, an incredible 30-year employee in our UI Trust Fund who looked at this, came up with a plan where we can actually divert additional funds from overpayments. Instead of having those funds go back into the UI Trust Fund, which just keeps growing, by the way, instead of diverting it back there, let's divert it into these training fund programs so that we can actually help employers out there with some of these dollars instead of just dumping it into an absolutely #1 in the country healthy training unemployment insurance trust fund. So we've got options around other ways to go about doing this. But I will tell you that doesn't lessen the need for this general fund request. We've been implementing this program with existing employees and temp employees as well, paying them out of this fund because the fund has been that popular. We need some administrative help or administrative help to implement that fund the way we really want to push it forward. So we've got, there's a number of things going on here, a number of balls up in the air, so to speak, in terms of developing this workforce training fund, because we are believers. We are seeing the survey results, and we're hearing from interns, we're hearing from businesses that are telling us it's not just paying for their employees to come in and do the work for them. It's developing their workforce, which is what we're all about and which is what we really want to do. So there's a number of ways to go about that. So thank you for bringing that up, Representative Larson.
All right, any additional questions for the department? Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you enlighten us on what your remote work policy or telework policy might be?
Thank you,
Director?
Madam Chairman. I'm going to refer to Deputy Gagan, who is in charge of all things personnel in our office.
DWS follows A&I's telework policy, but we do have sideboards. And the first sideboard is that no one works or teleworks more than 2 days a week unless there is, an accommodation that is needed or some kind of short-term exigency. And then beyond that, not all employees telework 2 days a week. I would say most employees are kind of a hybrid employee, which would mean you would telework on, certain days that are mutually agreed upon between yourself and your supervisor.
So to follow up on that.
Co-chairman?
Well, obviously you keep track of that. So it would be useful for us to know how many days are in the office, how many are not.
Boy, I don't need to know that. That's a lot of,
No, I think that'd be a pretty simple calculation. I mean,
co-chairman needs to know that. I don't need to know that. I trust that you are following wage and hour laws carefully and ensuring that those employees are able to clock in and clock out, whether they're working remotely or not in some fashion, if they are those types of employees. Is that fair?
Madam Chairman, I think that that's accurate. Liz, if you'd like to add anything, I'd also want to go back to something I heard Director Johansson say. I very much agree with him that this hybrid method is working for us. But I would also say that as a director, I want to know the people I'm working with, because I want to know how they interact with people. I want to know the individuals that we can promote and that we can really work with in the agency to make them career employees in our office. And when they're working telework, that sometimes is difficult. And we've had that discussion with our employees as well. That in-person interaction, not video interaction, that in-person interaction and how you interact with people is critical for that reason. I think it goes to employee retention when you can recognize an individual that's a leader and you can develop that leader and have, promote them as appropriate in your agency.
All right, committee, we're going to take a 7-minute break. So we'll come back at 4:02. The committee members too, particularly the House, need you to come back at 4:02 if you could, and then we'll work through these last 2 bills with the department, but allow you to stretch your legs. I didn't need any help on that either, but thank you. So we'll come back at 4:02. You want to know? All right, we can come back now. Senator Anderson has arrived. Are we ready? Wait for Dawn. We always wait for Dawn. Do not start without Dawn. Committee, I am waiting for Dawn. We do not start without Mr. Richards being completely ready. You're fine. He is number one priority, committee. Just know that from my perspective. All right, with that, we will come back from our break. The time is 4:06. We have our final two agenda items for the day, which is to consider draft legislation from the Department of Workforce Services. And we have in front of us 24 LSO 194, Investment of State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. And I see Ms. Ravalli is here from LSO to walk us through that bill draft. Mr. Kochek?
Before we do, could we get just a background of what these funds are, how they're funded, how much is in the funds? So we just have a general understanding of the funds again.
Director, the funds for unemployment insurance come from where?
The funds for the state unemployment insurance. The funds for the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund was developed through legislation in 1996, 97, that added a surcharge onto employers to put money into this fund, to develop a fund that would be able and be there to pay in the event that our federally required unemployment trust fund was depleted. That legislation was then repealed in 2002, 2003, and no more money now goes into that fund. So it's a state fund that sits there. It was paid for by employers, but it sits there. It's about $51 million. And it's the investment off of that fund that we use for these training fund dollars. Then we've got two funds here. We've got then the federally required UI trust fund. That's the other legislation that we're talking about here. That is the fund that employers pay taxes into. It's federally required. That's the fund that unemployment benefits are paid out of. So we're talking two completely separate funds there. Does that answer the question?
Co-Chairman Nicholas, are your questions answered?
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Ravalli, please.
Thank you. Tamara Revley here with the Legislative Service Office. You should have in front of you 24 LSO 194. It's working draft version 0.7. And I'll provide the committee just a little bit of reorientation onto this bill. The committee's number one priority this interim was to included study of the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. And so the committee first considered this topic at their July meeting. And again, this is the State UI Trust Fund. I think that was already explained well. This fund is currently invested in in the state agency pool, and this bill draft deals with changing that investment. The earnings from this fund are currently distributed to the Workforce Development Training Fund that you've been talking about this afternoon. Then at the October meeting, the committee considered an earlier version of this bill draft. The committee adopted one amendment and then directed some other revisions to be made. So now this bill really does three things. It first addresses an issue that the department identified concerning the use of the fund in the event of a federal government shutdown. That's the first thing. It allows for the investment of that $51 million state UI trust fund in Pool A instead of the state agency pool. And then it provides the director flexibility concerning the distribution of earnings for workforce development training, but it limits that authority in the event the fund is spent down or there's a loss. So those are the three things the bill does. It's not too long. We can jump right into it. On page 2, we are working and amending within the 94715, the investment statutes. This is the Pool A investment account. And this, on page 3, this bill draft creates a new Romanet 16 to allow up to 100% of the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund as determined by the director to be invested in the Pool A investment account. And as a reminder, anytime we change the percentage of funds that may be invested in Pool A, which includes equities, we need a 2/3 vote of each chamber voting separately for that specific part of the bill. So this page 3, lines 1 through 4, in order to take effect, you'll need a 2/3 vote for each chamber. Then the bill draft goes into Title 27, the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund provisions. And we first addressed that provision that was raised at the October meeting that related to concerns about a federal government shutdown. On lines 11 through 15, existing law is stricken related to the amounts withdrawn for payments needing to be forwarded immediately to the Federal Secretary of the Treasury. This bill draft just strikes that provision in order to allow flexibility to address whatever the situation might be, as would be determined by the director if circumstances merited some kind of a payment of benefits from this fund. Then subsection C addresses the distribution of earnings from the fund. Right now, you can see existing law on the bottom of page 3. All earnings are directed to be credited to the Workforce Development Training Fund. This bill would strike that and then amend how that would work on page 4. So upon notice to the state treasurer, the earnings of the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund may be credited to the Workforce Development Training Fund in amounts determined by the director, but subject to the limitations of this subsection. And that limitation deals with keeping the balance of the trust fund at least as healthy as it was on July 1st, 2024. So if the market value of the State Uninsured Employment Trust Fund at the end of the fiscal year is less than the market value of the fund on July 1st, 2024, the director would need to retain a portion of the investment earnings. And the portion of that investment earnings would be not less than 50% of the annual earnings or the amount necessary to restore the balance of the fund to that July 1st, 2024 market value, whichever is less. And Section 2 establishes the effective date of July 1st, 2024.
Questions for LSO? Okay, committee, just for your understanding, and everyone feels comfortable with how this is going to go both for this bill draft and the next bill draft. We'll have LSO explain the bill draft, then we'll go to the agency, which is the Department of Workforce Services. We'll ask questions of them. Then we'll go to the treasurer's office next, and then we'll go to general public comment. At that point, we'll call for a motion on the bill or not, or further discuss it, take amendments, and then a roll call vote with each bill draft, okay? All right, so questions for LSO? All right, seeing none, now we'll go to the agency, so the Department of Workforce Services. Director, any comments about this bill draft? You're in support.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We are here in support. This, again, as we were discussing in our earlier conversation about the budget, this allows us additional funds to really develop out more programs potentially in our training fund grant program.
Questions for the Department of Workforce Services?
So I have a question, Madam Co-Chair. So the question is the way that we've set up the mechanism for which, if it's earnings are less than 50%, and then using the 2024 balance, do those make sense? Or do you have other preferences or other ideas?
Director.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, we have been in discussion with John Williams with the Treasurer's Office. They do have some language to discuss, and we also discussed this with Representative Larson. There's some language that might make it easier that they've got to that they would like to propose, but this makes sense to me, even though we might have some language that's a little less ambiguous.
All right.
And what about the amounts, though? I mean, do we need to keep it at the 2024 balance? Do we?
Madam Chair, Madam
Director?
Chairman, there is no mechanism to increase that amount right now in the language. I think keeping it at the 51 million to me right now is sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So my question goes to the, really the linkage between the insurance and the UI trust fund and the unemployment compensation fund in terms of, solvency and when you would see one would not be needed relative to the other, that kind of thing. I'm referring to page 4 at the top there, just to sort of trying to back change from there to where we are now from your perspective, Director.
Director? Go ahead, Ms. Martin.
Madam Chair, Representative Henderson. Just to be clear and go back to our earlier comments, this specific bill only deals with the UI state required trust fund, and that trust fund we are not paying benefits out of. The UI federal trust fund is the fund that we pay those benefits out of, and that we look at the solvency rate. This particular fund was established in 97 and then repealed in 2002. And so there are no more funds being deposited into it. We're just investing it and using that investment income to fund the workforce development training funds.
Representative Larson?
Thank you, and I'll probably need to ask Tamara for a little bit of assistance, but Director, I think the intent of this, as we worked through this with you, was to make sure that we had access to that 50 million in the event we ever needed to pay unemployment insurance benefits. That's the intent for which it was created, and you've been very clear that we want to make sure that we still have access to do that in the event there's an emergency. I think the new language on page 4 in D does not limit the fund from growing. The director, subject to limitations, let's see, how does she say that, may credit upon notice to the state treasurer, earnings from the investment of the state employment insurance trust may be credited to workforce services, but doesn't say that it all has to. And so the fund could grow, but it could never drop below the balance that it is as of the date. So there is a little flexibility in there. And I think if they chose to take all the earnings and put it to workforce services as they notified the treasurer, that would do that. But am I accurate in that conversation?
Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, you're accurate. That is correct with that language may in there. So it could grow, yes. And if I can also then respond to Representative Henderson and your point, the fund is intended to pay in the event that there aren't enough federal funds to pay. But with the amount of money that we've got in our federal account right now, we will know long before we ever need the funds in this state account. We'll know long before that if we need to pull this fund out of Pool A and make it accessible to it and liquid so that we can pay money out of that account. So I think that's where you were going with your question as well.
Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Correct, Director, but frankly, I don't understand why we'd want to dissolve the fund. What's the purpose of that?
Director?
Madam Chairman, I didn't hear the last part of your question. I'm sorry.
What would be the purpose of dissolving the UI trust fund?
Madam Chairwoman, of dissolving the state UI trust fund?
Representative Larson, can you help?
I can, Madam Chairman, and I may go to Tamara, but that's existing language. When this was created back in 97 or something, it gave the governor the authority to dissolve that. Why they haven't. But we didn't change that existing language as it was amended.
Any other questions
Madam Chairman.
Senator Anderson?
Madam Chairman, I have a question on page 3. We're taking out line 12 through 15. I'm assuming that we have an obligation to this federal unemployment trust fund, and this account was if we took money out of it, it went to that. If we don't take money out of this and send it to the feds, do we take the money from somewhere else, or how do we handle that? Or how do we keep up with our federal accounts?
Director, how much money's in that federal account?
Madam Chairwoman.
Ms. Martin?
Madam Chair, in the federal UI trust fund, according to our balances of, as of October 2023, 476 million and some change.
I think we're good to go.
We are typically in the top 3 in the nation for solvency, and currently we're at about twice what the minimum solvency rate typically needs to be per DOL.
Madam Chairman.
Director, and then we'll go to Representative Larson.
And Senator Anderson, to your question, the reason that we took a look at this and thought this needed to come out is it really is not clear how those funds, if we needed to use that state fund, it's not clear how we would pay those monies out. This tied our hands to send it to the federal treasury. When we have concerns, maybe the federal treasury, if we get to that point, the federal treasury may be shut down as well. And then we would have no mechanism to pay the money out. This leaves us some options about how to go about doing it.
Representative Larson, that's it? Okay. Any further questions to the department on this bill draft? And we'll bring them back around if necessary. Representative Zwanitzer?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Remind me how much interest we're drawing off the state account per year or per biennium?
Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Zwanitzer, it's approximately $2 million per biennium. Correct?
Just
Right,
2 million.
biennium?
2 million.
2 million biennium.
That's where we're going to pool A. That is the purpose of the bill draft, good colleagues and senators. All right, Representative Zwanitzer, follow up?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Is there any flavor for every year making sure that the account grows by 500,000 or every 5 years to make it grow by a million? You know, maybe start out at 50 million as of next year, and then I'm just thinking 50 years down the road and we still are stuck with 50 or the same amount.
Representative Larson, you've worked pretty hard on this bill draft. Do you want to share that?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And so Representative Wannister, as we talked about this, we were trying to accomplish 2 things. One was to maintain the integrity or the balance of the fund as it exists today. So in the event there's a need to pay unemployment benefits, we could out of that fund. If for some reason the federally required fund can't be accessed. The next thing that we're trying to do is increase the earnings so that they can use it to benefit employees and employers around the state. So the intent was to be able to take those earnings and fund the training funds that we've been talking about rather than fund those with general fund dollars. Now, this doesn't prohibit the growth of the fund, but it doesn't require it.
All right, any additional questions to the department on the bill draft? With that, we'll go to Ms. Williams from the Treasurer's Office. Welcome, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dawn Williams, Deputy State Treasurer. I'm being joined today by Katie Smith, my CFO, online. She ended up having a sick kid she had to go get, but she's still going to pitch in. And while she's coming in, I just want to confirm.
Is she working remote right now? Just a question.
She is being accommodated remotely. Yes, Madam
Can we get her
Chairman.
time card? Just kidding.
You
Do
bet.
not provide that time card.
I will
Just
not
kidding.
charge her sick time for this time.
Great, thanks.
So Madam Chairman and committee, I do just want to confirm a couple of things, like I say, while Katie's coming in, that the account does have that ability to grow. That has been a concern that's been verbalized by many of you and confirmed by a good Representative Larson. The section where it talks about that is on the bottom of page 4. starting on line 21. And it talks about the annual amount of the earnings retained shall be not less than 50%. So it does make it, unless of course you're replenishing the fund to that balance that we are speaking of on June or July 1st of this year. And there's my friend Katie. We do have a couple of suggestions and she's going to go through them. The other thing I want to do is to confirm the director's statement that she, and to alleviate any concerns by committee members, that should funds be required to be needed to make payments from this account after it's in Pool A, as the director has stated, she will know well in advance of that time. And I've been assured, and this is standard practice by the investments that we make in this account, that we have some provision that is of liquidity that would allow us to be able to draw those funds for use. And that should not be a hindrance or a concern as to whether or not the funds can be expended.
All right. Would you like us to go to Katie Smith right now?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Hi, Katie. How are you?
Hello, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Katie Smith. I am the CFO for the State Treasurer's Office. Apologies for not being there in person. It also looks like it's midnight behind me, but it is not. I'm just down the street with a sick child. So I wanted to thank you again for your time and attention to kind of hear some of our suggested amendments on the draft legislation. So on page 4, line 7, we suggest removing upon notice to the state treasurer. This would allow the state treasurer's office to just continue to deposit those earnings to the one account. And then the Department of Workforce Services could then make those transfers of whatever amount they determine is appropriate, subject to the remaining language in the bill. And then continuing on page 4, line 12, 14, and 18, we suggest removing market value and replacing it with balance. Market value is determined at an investment pool level rather than at a fund level. So the market value language is not attainable. Then on page 5, line 1, we suggest removing market value and replacing it with balance due to the same reasoning. And I'm happy to stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Representative Stiff?
Madam Chairman, just so I understand what Ms. Smith has just said, on line 7, is the proposal to delete the words upon notice to the state treasurer? Is that the proposal?
Madam Chairman, Madam Chairman and Representative Stiff, yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
And someone has the complete motion, the complete amendment prepared? Yeah. All right. Any additional questions for Ms. Smith? All right, seeing none, Ms. Smith, thank you. Any questions for the treasurer's office? Final? Co-chairman?
Is there any reason to wait to make this effective in July?
Well,
Effective immediately.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
The question from the co-chairman was the effective date of the bill draft, whether or not to make it immediately or wait until July. Ms. Williams?
thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Co-Chairman, I don't think that would actually make a difference because because we do annual transfer of the earnings. That whether we do it effective immediately or it's effective July 1st, I don't think that will
Well, it wouldn't be
make
a
a big
balance of earnings. It would be a quicker ability to move it over into Pool A.
Ms. Williams?
Mr. Chairman, I think that depending on the timing of the bill's signature, we do asset allocation in March. And so should the bill be, and it should be, as I think about the dates of the end of the session and when our asset allocation meeting is, it would be possible to roll that in. That's a great point. I think that the timing would work if you made that effective immediate. We could include it in our asset allocation as we roll it out for the next year.
Okay, any additional questions? All right, seeing none, we'll go to any additional public comment. Yes.
Madam Chair, we do have Adele Olson online, so I'm not sure if that individual wants to provide public comment. If you'll raise your hand.
Mr. Olson, if you could raise your hand if you want to provide public comment. They have raised their hand. Okay, come on in. Welcome, Mr. Olson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do not have any comment.
All right, well, will you have public comment on the next bill draft?
I won't until the DFS hearings.
Okay, those won't be today, they'll be tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
All right, any additional public comment? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed. Committee, back to you. Moved by Co-Chairman Nicholas, seconded by Representative Walters. Pick one of the three. There's an amendment being moved by Co-Chairman Nicholas.
That we go to page 4, line 7, delete upon to treasure.
Closer to your mic and turn your mic on.
Can you pull that mic closer to yourself?
Yep, on page 4, line 7, delete after D, upon notice to the state treasurer, and capitalize E, remove the period. And then on lines 12, 14, and 18, on page 4, and line 1 on page 5, substitute balance for market value. And then amend the effective date to immediately.
Second.
All right, that was moved by Co-Chairman Nicholas, seconded by Representative Walters, Stith, Larson. Which one of you would like to second? We'll go with Stith. Shake things up a little bit. Discussion on the motion?
And Madam Chairman, I think we might need a conforming amendment. Can I discuss that?
Yes, please.
In order to make this effective immediately, that would affect the distribution for this fiscal year. And so you won't know the balance or the market value as of July 1st, 2024. So on page 4, line 14, you could either substitute the balance of the fund on July 1st, 2024 for 2023. We know what that balance was. Or you could but the amendment included the immediate effective date, yes. Or you could simply put in a number that whatever the balance of the fund is, 51 million.
I mean, the prior year's fine.
Right, so that will also be a change on page 4, line 14, strike 2024 and insert 2023.
Does Representative Stith find that conforming amendment friendly?
Yes.
Are there questions on the motion on the amendment? Question having been called, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion has passed. Any further discussion or motion on the bill?
So
Yes.
just for follow-up, just roughly, whoever can best answer, Don, probably you, what, the return will increase by about 2 or 3% roughly, I would think. Pool A to, obviously it depends on various things, but it'll be a nice increase to the amount of dollars.
Director?
Mr. Chairman, or Madam Chairwoman, Representative Nicholas, we did do a calculation if it had been in that pool, and we do have a dollar figure on that.
And what is that over a five-year period, or what's it?
I apologize, I misunderstood.
All right, with that,
So,
well, public comment is closed. We're on a vote. The question has been called. But you can further
well,
discuss.
if this bill passes, it would be useful if we had someone do a retrospective analysis for 5 years so we could show what the impact would be had we passed it. Thank you.
Roll call.
Members of the committee, the motion is on 24 LSO 0194, working draft 0.7 as amended. Representative Henderson. Representative Larson. Representative Sherwood. Representative Stiff.
Aye.
Representative Walters.
Aye.
Representatives Wanitzer Dave.
Aye.
Senator Anderson.
Aye.
Senator Guru.
Excused.
Senator Kinski, Senator Salazar, Co-Chairman Nicholas, Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, the motion is adopted.
All right, thank you. Committee, we're going to move on to 24 LSO 376, Federal Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund Adjustment. Ms. Ravalli is coming back up.
Right, I'll proceed if you're ready.
Please.
We should be on 24 LSO 376. It's version 0.3. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about Wyoming's federal unemployment insurance trust fund that had the balance of 470 million-ish. As a reminder, at the October meeting, the Department of Workforce Services requested a statutory change to decrease the amounts deposited in the federal trust fund and increase amounts that are deposited in two of the state's funds. So under Wyoming statute, existing law directs the department how to calculate the tax rate that's charged to employers for the unemployment compensation program. And the statute requires an adjustment factor to be calculated and charged to employers for benefits that have been paid out but not charged. This is the non-charged or ineffectively charged factor. And at that October meeting, the department requested a change to how this factor is distributed. So this bill draft just does this one thing. It changes the distribution of the non-charged, ineffectively charged factor that's collected from employers. Statute currently mandates a 60-40 split between the Federal Unemployment Compensation Fund, so 60% back in, and the Unemployment Support Fund, which is the fund that supports benefits and administrative expenses. This new distribution that was requested would be 20% to the federal fund, 60% to the Employment Support Fund, and 20% to the Workforce Development Training Fund. And again, under existing law, no funds are sent to the Workforce Development Training Fund from this adjustment factor. Under this bill draft, 20% of what's collected would be sent to the Workforce Development Training Fund. So you have version 0.3. I think I just explained it in concept, but the change you'll see is on page 2. The existing statute, subsection A, is what creates that adjustment factor and directs the department in how to calculate it. And beginning on line 11, you see the existing distribution of the adjustment factor and the changes that are made. Striking 60% and replacing it with 20%, striking 40% and replacing it with 60%, and then bringing in some new language on lines 15, 16, and 17 to send 20% to the Workforce Development Training Fund. Finally, the bill would be effective July 1st, 2024.
Questions for LSO, Co-Chairman Nicholas?
So could you explain to me what the adjustment factor is supposed to do? And does this exist in all, is it federally mandated, or is this something we created, or where did it evolve from in this bill?
Ms. Ravalli, if you know, or the director, anyone who can answer the question, yes. Director?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Co-Chair Nicholas. This is a specific factor that Wyoming developed many years ago when they had a fund that was not healthy. There are basically 3 factors. This is one of them. This is a factor that when charges are incorrectly made, they're overcharged, what have you, they have to be money that are brought back into the fund. What this does is just reallocate so that some of that money goes back into the UI Trust Fund. But now because it's so healthy, we don't need it to go there nearly as much as they used to. So what we're trying to do is divert that money then into the ESF fund, Employment Support Fund, which helps us run the UI program, as well as pay services for other programs that we have. And it puts that 20% into the training fund, which is we've never done before. So all it does is really recognize for employers is that we've got a healthy fund. Let's take these monies and make them work for you a little bit better than dumping them back into the trust fund.
And so my question is, you said we have the healthiest fund of any other state, basically.
And I'm sorry,
You said we had the healthiest fund of about any other state on a per capita or.
Director.
Madam Chairwoman, Co-Chair Nicholas, we have either the #1 healthiest fund or within the top 3 at various times.
And so my only question is, what are the alternatives? Could we reduce the amount we're charging? Take that, say, take 20% and give it back to the employer, or so that it's a lower amount that they pay monthly into the program?
Madam Chairman, Co-Chair Nicholas, we have previously been informed we could not refund money back to employers. We are revisiting that with Department of Labor individuals right now. We don't know the answer to that question.
Well, and I'm not saying, I appreciate that. I'm not saying refund, we just change the amount they pay. Is that a set amount or is it a federally set?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair Nicholas, we are currently now at the lowest tax rate we've ever been since 2007. We have employers that have a 0% tax rate right now. So reducing that base rate, reducing those tax rates right now really isn't a doable thing. This is an option that Chris Spunk came up with. That's a very creative way of reallocating funds. You know, when this was first developed, it was really to put money into that account to make it healthy. We have got to do some things that are going to pull back on that fund because there's no purpose to have that amount of money just continually going into that fund and it growing and growing and growing. This is a creative way to redistribute some of those monies.
Additional questions? Additional questions for Ms. Ravalli from LSO? Representative Stiff?
Madam Chairman, actually, my question is probably for Director Cooley.
Okay.
The
Does
question
anyone have
being,
any additional questions for Ms. Ravalli? And if not, we can let her go back to her place. Any final questions for LSO? All right, seeing none, thank you. Now to the department, Representative Stiff?
Madam Chairman, Director Cooley, this 20% that would go into the Workforce Development Training Fund, about how much money do you expect that to be each year? How much money are we talking about?
Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Stiff, Chris did some calculations based on previous amounts that have been allocated around there. Money going into the Workforce Development Training Fund would be close to $4 million. Money going into the Employment Support Fund would be $11.8 million. And then the additional amount that would still be going back into the trust fund would be $3.9 million. So we're talking about some potentially significant amounts of money here.
Madam Chairman, is that an annual, are those annual numbers?
Madam Chair.
Director?
Thank you.
Representative Stiff, correct.
Those were annual numbers. All right. Any additional questions? Representative Larson?
Can I get those numbers again? It's 11 million to the support fund. I could get those numbers again. I apologize, Madam Chairman.
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, we did give you this in a handout. So I just want to let you know that also. So the money going back into the trust fund would be a little over $3.9 million. The money going into the Workforce Development Training Fund would be $3.9 million. The money going into the Employment Support Fund would be $11.8 million.
Okay, thank you.
And Madam Co-Chair, the handout doesn't have those numbers. I think
Yeah.
we talked about this last time with the bill.
Madam Chair, Co-Chair Nicholas, this was from the October handout. This is the front of it.
So that's in our October meeting materials. If you want to go back and find that handout, you'd go to our October meeting. All right, additional questions to the department?
So could we get,
Co-Chairman Nicholas has a question.
thank you, Madam Co-Chair. What I'd like to do is see the 10-year annual balance of the federal fund, the 476 million, and what the growth rate is on that. Is that invested in any way on the federal government side, or is it just a bank account?
We're getting different answers there. Are the federal funds invested? Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, that is actually invested by the U.S. Treasury. And they do that for all of the states. So we get a statement, I believe, monthly that tells us what the investment amount is on that. So we really don't have any control over the investment of that account.
So they're probably doing it through treasuries, though.
That,
We'll get an update on that.
And Madam Co-Chair, what's the annual contribution rate to it now? In other words, how much is it, I mean, we can calculate the math, but how much is it receiving now at 40%? Because we're going from 40 to 20, right?
Madam Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, are you talking about into the trust fund or into employment support
Into the
fund?
trust fund.
Into the trust fund that's the 11 million. So basically it's swapping the 60%.
Yeah. And is that account required to be a certain percentage of something?
So Madam Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, so when Director Cooley was explaining the amount that is recommended, DOL does not govern how much money we have in our account. They do a recommendation that you have enough money for at least a year. Our high cost multiplier is approximately 2 to 2.5 years. So we do run higher than most states. What happens is when you get into too low of an amount, then you risk potentially losing, excuse me, your certification for federal unemployment tax credit. And that would be basically just employers would be paying more in a different tax than they are through their state unemployment tax. And to go back to what you had spoken about, as far as lowering tax rates, there's also a minimum tax rate that we have to have. We have to have an average tax rate of 1%. With the money that we received back from the governor's office for CARES Act funding to replace to non-charge these employers, really made our trust fund really healthy. And normally those funds would take 3 years to replenish. So our trust fund is very healthy. In 22, 23, and upcoming in 24 for anyone that has a business, you might get another zero tax rate. Our average is just barely over 1%. And for us to stay in compliance and stay certified with federal unemployment tax, we have to have at least an average tax rate of 1%. So really, we're kind of in a situation where lowering the tax rate really isn't an option either, because we put the federal unemployment tax at jeopardy.
Well, I think that's good to know, particularly if we're answering questions on the floor, that we're not taking money out of employers' pockets. Other questions?
Are you sure? I'm gonna give you a few seconds. 1,
Don't get me too long.
3. Okay, additional questions for the department? Going once, going twice. All right. Are you sure? Are you sure you want to come back? Let's come back. I mean, we're almost giving it up right now.
Well, what I was going to say, Madam Co-Chair, is that we're going to need a one-pager on this if this bill passes for explanation and to answer questions.
Or a video conference.
All right, so any additional public comment on this bill draft? Anybody online? All right. Public comment is closed. Committee, back to you. I hear Co-Chairman Nicholas moving the bill.
So moved.
Seconded by Representative Walters. Is there an amendment? Co-Chairman Nicholas?
You got any minutes? Nope. Question?
Question having been called, roll call.
Members of the Joint Appropriations Committee, the motion is on 24 LSO 0376, Working Draft 0.3. Representative Henderson, Representative Larson, Representative Sherwood, Representative Stiff.
Aye.
Representative Walters.
Aye.
Representatives Juan and Sir Dave.
Aye.
Senator Anderson. Aye. Senator Guru.
Excused.
Senator Kinski left a aye vote by or in absentee.
So just for a quick, yeah, go ahead, keep going.
Senator Salazar. Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Aye.
Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, the motion is adopted.
So just a quick piece. So I allow proxies for the Senate in the event they leave one, and how that works for members of the Senate is you go to session, our secretary, and leave your proxy vote. And then when your name is called, when you are not here, they will announce your vote as opposed to a chairman doing that. So just a point of clarity. So Senator Kinski had to leave and he left his vote accordingly. So with that, good committee. Department, Co-Chairman Nicholas is not done with you. Okay. Wants those time cards. Co-Chairman Nicholas?
So what we need, if we take if this passes, we're gonna have to have corrective action or something on the budget request. We're doing the same thing where we're feeding the workforce fund. And so Don, we need to make a note of that so that it'll be, but if we put 4 million in it, just say, and then you got 4 million here, we just gotta make sure that's what we wanna do,
So we have Representative Zwanitzer is responsible for the Department of Workforce Services on the House side. Is that correct?
Correct.
And we have Senator Guru on the Senate side. So that one pager would be preferable to send to all the committee, but certainly Representative Zwanitzer and Senator Guru.
And it would be nice if we can review it first, because if we want to modify it, because we may hand it out on the floor, circulate it, so everyone can have it in front of them, just so we can make sure we're all on the same page and we understand it, so.
You can just give that directly to Senator Guru. I won't take control of it. All right, committee, final questions from the department? All right, thank you. Committee, great work on our first day of our second week. Time is 4:52. We've got minutes to spare. Mr. Richards, anything?
Madam Chairman, looking forward to tomorrow, you have the Department of Family Services, the Wyoming Business Council, Department of Corrections, and the Board of Parole. It's likely you will be running a bit ahead and anticipating your interest in Wednesday's schedule, which is really the education day. We have reached out, given the expeditious manner in which you've addressed the agency hearings today. We could include the Department of Insurance at the end of the day tomorrow. We have checked their availability. The reason I raised this is to give them appropriate notice and also to get a sense of the committee's desire on Wednesday. That's the last day of the week you will be working here, whether you wanted to do something similar to Friday, meaning shoot for a mid-afternoon or earlier afternoon departure.
I know Senator Salazar intends to leave a little early on Wednesday. I'm assuming Senator Kinski would appreciate the same. I don't know about
I think we all would, yeah. We can plan on working through lunch as well and kind of just to shorten the day.
but we really didn't do that, candidly. We took a break. So yeah, the Department of Insurance, good thinking, Mr. Richards, on telling them to be on the ready for tomorrow afternoon. We'll have them on deck in the event we're able to work through things on time and under budget. All right, thanks, committee. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.